Chapter 1. Ding! As the door to the small shop was pushed open, a gentle female voice rang out. Welcome. At the same time as the voice rang out, a beautiful face appeared on both sides of the door. Large wavy blonde hair, bright red lips, a flickering smile, and an ostentatious sweetness. However, the person who pushed open the door and entered did not look at this beautiful face for long. Instead, he frowned and shouted towards the counter, "Sillin, get old Devon to change this face. How many years has it been?" The youth who was busy holding a bottle of wine behind the counter shrugged his shoulders. Can't be helped. The boss likes it. Come on, getting old Devon to change his welcome image is harder than getting him to quit gambling. Some people in the bar jeered, laughing and shouting loudly. As the dream lover of the entire planet's males 30 years ago, the face on the door had indeed made many people obsessed. Time is the cruelest killer. A beauty grows old easily. However, before this killer could make a move, this beautiful singer, screen lover, had perished due to the failure of the genetic transformation. In the first 10 years, there were indeed many people who placed the holographic image of this beautiful singer in their rooms. However, 30 years had passed after all. The tides rose and fell, the fleeting clouds disappeared. The new beauty had buried the lost beauty, and not many people were willing to look back on the fantasy that no longer existed. Of course, the owner of this bar, old Devon, was a sentimental person. Even though it had been 30 years, he still placed the beautiful singer's image in the bar's welcome image. 30 years had passed, just like before. This was also one of the topics that the customers who came here talked about. The person pursed his lips, seemingly very disapproving of the owner's actions. He was also too lazy to say anything more. He walked to an empty seat at a table and sat down. Everyone around him was familiar with him. Very quickly, they began chatting and did not order anything. Sillin, who was also the youth standing at the counter, took down a bottle of wine called "Smile Under the Scorching Sun" from the wine cabinet. Placing it on the table in front of the person, he opened the bottle cap and left to fetch wine for the other customers. Without any superfluous words, the person continued chatting with the fellows around him. His hand grabbed the bottle that had already been uncorked and took a gulp. "Ha, this wine is still the best. It's spicy enough. Good kick." Sillin smiled, returned to the counter, and recorded the accounts in his e-book. This bar was very ordinary, and the town it was located in was also very ordinary. Almost all the people here were at the grassroots level. In the words of the people in the central city, they were the lower class. To put it bluntly, they were the untouchables. The untouchables had their own happiness. They liked to sit in bars that did not have high-end robots and only relied on human services. They liked to drink cheap but strong alcohol and talk about what happened in the day with their familiar drinking buddies. They would also complain about their superiors who squeezed them dry and gossip about someone's gossip. It was simple and beautiful. The upper-class people, in the prosperous areas, did not understand the happiness of these poor people. It was like a successful person wearing exquisite clothes running on the road of money and power, occasionally passing by a ruin and seeing a stray cat excitedly swatting away flies. They would think, how bored must this person be to do such a thing? They are indeed lowly beings. What was lowly? What is nobility? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the 7 genetic ranks separated everything. People with lowly genes were lowly people, and people with high genes were noble people. That was all. The people in the bar, including Sillin, were all rank F genotypes. On this planet, they could be classified as the lowest of the poor. People with rank E genotypes would be given the opportunity to work in the prosperous areas, and only people with rank D and above could truly establish themselves in the prosperous areas. As for rank G, they were the most pitiful type of people. They were born with poor and incomplete genes, and the diseases they brought could not be cured with simple treatment. For example, there were severe deformities, premature aging, and other congenital diseases. Sillin's former girlfriend, Hina, was a rank G genotype. Premature aging and congenital diseases, coupled with poverty, made it impossible for the cute girl to live out the most beautiful years of her youth. The descendants of superior genes and superior genotypes would not be bad, and might even be better. The descendants of inferior genes and inferior genotypes would be the complete opposite, and the polarization would become more and more serious. Therefore, more people with lower genotypes would try to change their genes, but those who succeeded were few and far between. Apart from the huge expenditure of funds, the success rate of genetic change was extremely low to begin with, and the higher one went, the harder it would be. This was the reason why those with higher genotypes were so proud. And the screen lover from 30 years ago had become history precisely because of the failure of genetic change. People were born to be unequal, it was just that habit would make people numb. Hey, Cylon, old Devon hasn't appeared for many days. He still hasn't returned from his blind date? Someone shouted. Yeah, the success rate this time should be quite high. Cylon replied with a smile. TCH, the crowd did not think much of it, and began to criticize old Devon's failed blind date history. Cylon only listened with a smile, and did not express his opinion. He did not tell those people that old Devon had actually gone to fulfill his dream because he had hit the jackpot and became rich overnight. Old Devon's dream was to find an E-rank genotype woman who was neither too young nor too old, and extract the sperm he had stored in the sperm bank long ago. It would be best if he could give birth to an E-rank genotype baby, open a small shop in the city, and live a stable life. As long as he had money, there was no need to worry about not being able to find an E-rank genotype woman, even if old Devon was an F-rank genotype that was one level lower. The annual water, land, and air competition was something that the people of the entire planet paid special attention to, and it was also what gamblers looked forward to the most. This was because the stakes were big enough that even if they did not win completely, as long as they reached a certain standard, the poor would still become rich overnight. Old Devon had been able to escape his impoverished status precisely because he had hit the jackpot in this competition. Of course, the reason why old Devon was able to hit the jackpot was mostly because of Cylon. Every time old Devon made a bet, he would ask Cylon first before he dared to bet. Although old Devon was a money grubber, he was still very good to Cylon, otherwise Cylon would not have helped him. Moreover, old Devon had already sent the bonus for this time's jackpot to Cylon on the same day. As the night deepened, the customers slowly left. Cylon took a shower, changed his clothes, sprayed a special kind of chemical to remove the other smells, and then locked the shop door. He looked at the black sky, where there were a few tiny specks that looked like starlight flashing. The weather forecast said that there would be a moderate rain lasting an hour starting from midnight, and there were still 40 minutes until midnight. 40 minutes would be enough. 30 minutes later, Cylon arrived at a factory area under the cover of some protruding eaves and sheds. He deftly and skillfully avoided the peripheral scanning, took out a magnetic card that he had prepared beforehand, opened the main door, and silently snuck into a staff dormitory next to the warehouse. After all, this was not the central city, and the security system in such a small place was neither brilliant nor complicated. The person lying on the bed seemed to have sensed something, but before he could do anything, he lost consciousness, as if he had fallen into a deep sleep again. However, somewhere behind the person's ear and neck, a place covered by hair, there were 3 pitch-black thin needles inserted soundlessly. Cylon's hand swept over them lightly, and after making sure that there were no other traces left, he left through the cover of the eaves and sheds, just like before. There was a heaven's eye in the sky, and thermal weapons would be detected by the local area detection network. If he wanted to solve things without anyone knowing, he could only use the most primitive method, because they did not have energy waves. As a hunter, Cylon could be considered to have had a hard time. Due to his age and genotype, he could not become a hunter in the open. To be more precise, Cylon was a shadow hunter. The so-called shadow hunter was the collective name for the type of people who worked with hunters but were hidden in the dark, with sensitive identities that could not be exposed to the public. From the age of 14 until now, Cylon had been a shadow hunter for close to 3 years. He had initially chosen to be a hunter because of Hannah's illness. After Hannah passed away, Silen had been maintaining this profession. This was because he needed a large amount of money to leave this planet safely. 5 minutes after Silen left, another shadow sneaked in and took the person Silen had killed away to exchange for bounties, then split them evenly. Throughout the close to 3 years of working together, the hunter had never known the identity of the shadow. Of course, the hunter did not care. As long as he could successfully capture the prey and exchange it for bounties, the rest was not important. Moreover, Silen believed that the hunter he had chosen would not waste too much effort to investigate the identity of the shadow. This was because Silen had put in a lot of effort to analyze all possible situations before he had chosen the target to work with. To some of the less qualified hunters, without the shadow, they would not be able to complete their mission at all. They would not get any bounties, and would even lose their lives. Therefore, to a certain extent, these hunters and shadows were in a symbiotic relationship. As for the top hunters, they did not need shadows at all. Of course, hunter regiments were an exception. They were a special kind of existence. The hunter would not have thought that the shadow he was working with, a rank D genotype, was only a rank F genotype. No one would believe him even if he said it out loud. At midnight, the pitter-patter of rain could be heard. Silen sat in an abandoned building, looking at the water droplets that were getting bigger and bigger outside. The rain had washed away Silen's lingering scent and tiny traces. This was also one of the reasons why Silen had chosen to act at this time. Silen had no idea what natural raindrops looked like. He had only seen them on television, and they did not exist on this planet at all. There were only weather stations that controlled the weather precisely, adjusted the intensity of sunlight precisely, and simulated wind, rain, and lightning. Everything was man-made. A gust of wind blew past. Through the cracked walls, Silen caught the scent of cement and waste slag. Other than that, there was also an unexpectedly familiar scent. The corner of Silen's eyebrow twitched. He carefully identified the scent in the wind, and after confirming it, he had a strange expression on his face. He did not expect someone to use that in this day and age. Chapter 2. Silen's nose was very sensitive. He could separate and analyze the mixed scents. That was why Silen was surprised. Was the person who used these reagents bored out of his mind, or was he interested in research? Or was there some other reason? The smell did not come from the rain outside. From the direction of the wind and several other smells mixed in with the airflow, it could be determined that the smell came from inside the building. However, who would use those ancient reagents in an abandoned building like this? Or rather, in this day and age, other than some weird R&D departments, who would use such primitive methods? Following the smell, Silen found a pipe as thick as a thumb in a pile of waste. He didn't walk far along the pipe before he realized that the back of the pipe was hidden in the wall. He hid it really well. He turned on the thumb-sized light projector. The light blue light shone on the wall, revealing the pipe buried in the wall. After checking, Silen became more and more curious. Interesting. Other than this pipe, Silen found a few other places, and they were all very well hidden. Silen became more careful. Although leaving this place was the best choice, Silen had a strange feeling that urged him to find the reason. Going down the pipe, he went through many turns. Some of them even required Silen to crawl in through the ancient air vents. When he arrived at the first floor of the building, Silen opened a hidden cover and walked down the narrow staircase below. The surroundings were quiet, but not completely silent. After carefully sensing that there was no one within a short distance, Silen held the light and continued walking. The number of pipes increased, and Silen knew that he was getting closer and closer to his target. He took a deep breath and turned off the flashlight. Although he did not sense anyone in front of him, his instincts told him that it would not be as smooth as it seemed. Although the energy waves produced by the flashlight were limited to a range of 10 meters, Silen decisively turned it off just to be safe. The surroundings were pitch black. Silen relied on the subtle flow of air to determine the direction and avoid obstacles. About half an hour later, the surrounding space gradually expanded, and some fingernail-sized electronic lights appeared one after another. With the light, one could see that this place had a certain history. There was also a layer of dust on the electronic board. Although it was not thick, no one would be able to leave this place for at least a month. Looking at the spots of light on the wall, Sillin became more and more uneasy. Something was wrong, very wrong. This place was like a trap. A trap. A strong sense of danger struck. Sillin didn't think too much about it and turned around to run back. As a hunter, his instincts told him that he had no way of dealing with the upcoming danger. But what was even faster than Sillin was the thick, custom-made steel plate that sealed off the path of retreat. With a flip of his hand, a metal knife appeared in Sillin's hand. Although he could cut through the steel plate with a laser knife, it would take a lot of time, and the strong energy fluctuations of the laser knife would expose Sillin's position. With his back against the steel plate, Sillin quietly looked ahead. He knew that there must be someone up ahead. Tap, 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 the footsteps were neither fast nor slow as they approached. There was no intention of hiding at all. Instead, there was a fearless attitude. Click. A beam of light shone and the tunnel was instantly lit up. Sillin squinted his eyes and quickly recovered from the discomfort he felt from going from weak to strong light. But the person standing in front of him did not seem to be in a hurry, waiting for Sillin to recover. It was an old man who looked like an F-rank genotype who was nearing 100 years old. He looked like he would be buried at any moment. The old man's skin was yellowish-brown and his body was shriveled. His exposed arms showed the atrophy of his muscles. Because the old man was wearing goggles, Sillin could not see his eyes clearly. But it was this shriveled old man in front of him that made all the hairs on Sillin's body tremble. The old man slowly walked towards Sillin, so leisurely that it was as if he was taking a stroll. Strike first and gain the upper hand. Sillin jumped up with a whoosh, not even leaving an afterimage behind. It was clear that his speed was not any weaker than a D-rank genotype. Clang! An ear-piercing sound of metal rang out. Next to the old man's carotid artery, a withered twig hand gripped the tip of the knife firmly, as if it was holding a twig. Be it the ion blade or the laser blade, the energy waves generated by them were too great. With Sillin's current physical fitness, the chances of him exposing himself were even higher. Therefore, Sillin preferred to use cold weapons and kill people in silence. But even such a specially made alloy knife was easily blocked by the old man in front of him who looked like he was about to be buried. No, it should be said that it was easily gripped. 3 years of experience as a hunter between life and death gave Sillin no time to think. The person in front of him was not someone he could handle. Run! But before Sillin could make a move, his body was suddenly tightly bound by something that looked like liquid metal. Looking towards the source of those things, Sillin was shocked to find that these liquid metal things were coming from the 5 fingers of the old man's other hand. To be precise, they were extensions of the old man's 5 fingers. Human? Machine? Mutant? Or was it some unknown species? Sillin could smell the scent of death from the cold touch. Every pore on his body was exhaling cold air. Crack! The alloy dagger that had taken the lives of God knows how many wanted criminals was crushed. The old man's withered fingers grabbed Sillin's neck and lifted Sillin off the ground like a little chick. His limbs were bound, and the blood vessels in his neck were almost blocked. Hee, you came at the right time. From the sound of his voice, the old man seemed to be very happy, even a little impatient. If a normal person was grabbed like this, they would have started to roll their eyes, but Sillin still had the mental energy to think of a countermeasure. The old man looked at Sillin, and was even more satisfied. Door after door opened, door after door closed. Sillin was more and more shocked. There was actually such a place hidden in this poor town. This underground secret room was definitely more than 30 to 50 years old, and it was far more complicated than Sillin thinks. Be it protection or concealment, it was done extremely well. Otherwise, it would not have been discovered for so many years. Or perhaps, the people who discovered it were already dead. Scylla glanced at an open room, which was filled with people who were kept in liquid tanks like preserved specimens. The twisted expressions on their faces made Scylla shudder. It was obvious that these people had suffered unbearable torture before they died. Perhaps, in the next moment, Scylla would become one of them. The old man did not intend to kill Scylla immediately. He controlled the strength in his hands very well, not giving Scylla a chance to escape, nor did he damage Scylla's bodily functions. The reason why the old man said that Scylla had come at the right time was because Scylla had just delivered himself to the door after a dead test subject was put into a liquid tank. Scylla was brought into a room filled with instruments and tools of all sizes. There were many bottles and jars placed on a table in a corner of the room, and Scylla had already identified a few of them from the gas that was expelled from the pipes. These were the reagents used to purify DNA. In this era, except for those old pedants, almost no one used or understood the primitive method of DNA purification. Scylla had also done similar experiments, but it was only out of curiosity, and he did not conduct in-depth research. With today's technology, purifying DNA only required a palm-sized instrument. It was fast, precise, and could even perform functional analysis of the genome. However, no matter what kind of purification and analysis instrument it was, it required a real name authentication and registration. Every instrument had a registration code, chip binding, and data connection. Since the old man had chosen to purify by hand, and from the looks of it, he was doing it in large quantities, it meant that this person was engaged in illegal research and was a wanted man. However, Scylla searched through the wanted information in his mind but could not find anything related to this person in front of him. The planet's wanted list, regardless of the degree of danger, was public. There were only two pieces of information on the wanted list, one was a picture, and the other was the bounty. Because this laboratory was underground and covered with a rare layer of isotope isolation, it had not been discovered by the sky's eye. The data from the instruments in the laboratory should also not be connected to the outside world, so it could avoid other investigations. What was this old man trying to do? Placing Scylla on a floating white table, the old man pressed a button on an instrument next to it. Scylla's wrists and limbs were buckled by a hook that emerged from the table. Fine silk threads emerged from the table and drilled into Scylla's body through his clothes, instantly turning Scylla into a test subject full of wires and tubes. One side was full of red silk tubes, and the other side was full of blue silk tubes. The data on the monitor next to him kept jumping. Since Scylla had been tied up by the thing on the table, even his fingers were not let go. The old man retracted his hand, and his fingers returned to their original withered form. After injecting a tube of something that looked like a cold, sticky liquid into Scylla, he quickly pressed the button on the instrument and analyzed the data from more than 10 other instruments. Pain that drilled into his bones. His fingers trembled, and the blood in his entire body flowed irregularly. Every moment was challenging the limits of his nerves, and his thoughts were almost instantly scattered. However, after a short period of blankness, Scylla finally managed to focus his thoughts bit by bit. Otherwise, it wouldn't be long before he himself would become one of those specimens. Those sticky liquid-like things were actually tiny specially made biochips. Some of their properties were very similar to gene carriers, and they could be integrated into the chromosomes of the human body to replicate and divide at the same time. The red silk tubes were in charge of induction, providing nutrients while inducing the metabolism of the host body to speed up cell division. Meanwhile, the blue silk tubes were in charge of apoptosis, causing the lagging cells to die. The old man stared at a rising wave on the screen and chuckled a few times. He turned the knob in his hand 10 degrees clockwise. Every 10 degrees, the degree of induction would increase by one stage, and the degree of activation of the biochips would also increase accordingly. The changes in the hippocampal region of the brain, the methylation region on the chromosomes, and the communication frequency between cells were displayed in the form of data on the constantly flashing screen. This made the old man extremely excited. Scylla's nerves were once again assaulted by an even greater wave of pain, and then he painstakingly gathered his spirit together. Not simple, not simple. A mere F-rank genotype can actually reach such a level. Looking at the knob that had already been turned 180 degrees, the old man began to talk to himself, but his words were filled with obvious excitement. 180 degrees meant that the biochips had already been activated by 50%, and now this person was actually still alive. The data flashing on the screen caused the old man's voice to tremble slightly. Among those experimental subjects in the past, less than half of them could withstand 180 degrees. This meant that this mere F-rank genotype's body's endurance was comparable to that of a D-rank. However, how long could he last? Another 10 degrees would result in another set of data that made the old man unbearably excited, but the old man didn't care about Silen's life or death. Silen searched for an opportunity to escape amidst the constant bombardment of pain. Chapter 3. At the moment of life and death, intense pain will crush your will to live. At this time, you might as well perform deep self-hypnosis to numb the nerves that transmit pain. Focus your mind and use the shortest amount of time to think. This was what Genya had said to Silen before, but Silen had never actually carried it out because he had never been as powerless as he was now. Hypnosis. Self-hypnosis. His entire body twitching, Silen took a deep breath with difficulty and closed his eyes. Looking at the rising wave on the screen, the old man's hand trembled. He took off his goggles and leaned closer to the screen. His sunken eyes stared at the screen as if trying to determine if this was real or not. The knob had already turned 270 degrees, and the chip was activated by 75%. Without looking at Silen on the experiment table, the old man's smile was a little twisted. The pulse of the life indicator was still quite strong, which meant that it could be adjusted even higher. 280 degrees, 290 degrees, 300 degrees, the instrument had already started to issue warnings. The crimson warning sign and the ear-piercing beep did not shake the old man in the slightest. The old man's eyes were filled with madness. In the past, almost 1,000 test subjects had not been able to withstand 300 degrees, but today, he. My, Ori's name, will also appear in Glory and Code. Silen did not have the energy to pay attention to the old man's words. If he heard it, he would definitely think that this old man was crazy. With only this kind of resource allocation, he actually wanted to appear in Glory and Code. Glory and Code were the names of the most famous electronic magazines in the Galaxy network. They were known as the history books of the League of Stars. In front of these two electronic magazines, the countless electronic publications of the League of Stars were reduced to the background. These two were also the only publications with over 90 contribution points in the League of Stars electronic publication system. In other words, the lowest contribution points for the people's achievements or inventions published in these two electronic magazines was at least 90. The people, achievements, and research that appeared in Glory and Code, any one of them was enough to make the entire League of Stars tremble. There were many generals and politicians in Glory, while there were many academic technicians in Code. Regardless of whether it was the people or the results recorded in these two giant magazines, all of them were the result of the accumulation of countless manpower, material resources, financial resources, and time. On planet Brown Earth, where Silen was, the highest reported contribution was only in the 20s, and it could only be recorded in some magazines that did not have much influence. Actually, as long as the contribution points exceeded 10, it would be broadcasted on the planet's TV station for more than 10 days, not to mention the contribution points above 90. Therefore, normal people would think that the old man's words were delusional. The old man turned the knob again. 310 degrees, 320 degrees, D. The sound of the alarm grew more and more urgent, and the fluctuations of the life curve began to become chaotic. Several instruments had already begun to emit smoke and vibrate with banging sounds. A few buttons had also exploded, and the vibrations were becoming more and more intense. The silk tubes on Silen's body also began to tremble, as if they were unable to bear the load. Bang! One of the finger cuffs that locked onto Silen's finger bounced off due to the high load. Bang! Another one. The old man no longer had time to care about Silen. All of his attention was attracted by the data on the screen. His finger was on the knob, and he could not wait to see the final data. Buttons were flying off from the instruments all around him. There was no more time. Silen knew where his limit was. Two of his freed fingers clamped onto a button that had bounced off from an unknown instrument. This was the reaction of the last trace of consciousness left in the self-hypnosis stimulated by the pain, and it was also Silen's last chance. It was just a trace of consciousness, but the analysis was surprisingly accurate. It was unprecedentedly accurate, like a precise instrument making adjustments and error analysis. In almost less than a second, Silen shot out the button in his hand. Poof! The flying button passed through the ground, the wall, and the baffle of an instrument, and after 3 ricochets, it shot into the central nervous system in the old man's left eye, cutting off the neural network circuit, and he died instantly. Meanwhile, at this time, the madman's finger was on the knob, preparing to make the final adjustment. The knob's display was already pointing at 350 degrees. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a matter of life and death. If it really was turned 360 degrees, then Silen would have lost his life. Fortunately, the old man really was a human. Fortunately, the old man did not carry out abnormal modifications on his entire body. The old man who died instantly collapsed next to the instrument. The moment the old man died, all of the silk tubes that bound Silen were retracted. A warning popped up on the instrument, and an electronic voice sounded. Master is dead. Beginning to erase program. Silen could not care less about his still somewhat numb body. He flipped over and fell off the stage. He could not stand up, and could only raise his head to look at the images and data that instantly swept past the screen. Every piece of information that was about to be erased would flash across the screen. It was hard to imagine that the old man would set up such an erasure mode. Even those with B rank or even A rank genotypes might not be able to capture the data and images. Even if they could capture it, they might not be able to remember it all, and it was limited to only one screen. But Silen was able to memorize the contents of these dozen or so screens in his mind. This would have been impossible in the past. Although his memory was strong in the past, his capture speed could not keep up, much less memorize over a dozen screens at the same time. Silen's body was adjusting swiftly. His eyes appeared to be unfocused, but the information flashing on the dozen or so screens was deeply imprinted in his mind. If he did not understand these information, he might not even know how he died. The thing the old man injected into him was like an unknown bomb. 5 minutes later, the program erasure was complete. All information related to this experiment, including information about the old man Ori Hansen, as long as it flashed across the screen, was memorized by Silen. Erasure program complete. Executing destruction program in 5 minutes. Counting down to desertification. Fuck. Silen cursed in his heart. He moved his body, which had regained some of its senses, and propped himself up with difficulty. He staggered toward the exit. All the doors to the underground laboratory were open. The other rooms were used to store things such as specimens, food, equipment, drugs, and so on. The real core was the room Silen was in, so Silen did not have the mind or time to care about the things in the other rooms. He followed the route he had been brought in from his memory and walked out. The doors were all open and unobstructed, as if it had been specially arranged. 5 minutes was just right. When Silen reached the vent of the pipe at the edge of the laboratory, the desertification program was activated. A pit that looked like quicksand appeared in the center of the laboratory and extended outwards. The ground, all the experimental equipment, and the dead old man all turned into quicksand. The range of the desertification spread. When Silen crawled out of the vent and returned to the building, the desertification reached the vent. Silen did not have time to rest. He knew that the so-called destruction program by the old man was not just desertification. In order to prevent the results of his research from being leaked, the old man had bound his life to all the programs. To be so resolute, the destruction would definitely be more thorough. Fortunately, it was still dark and there was no one on the streets. Under the cover of darkness, Silen walked under the canopy and under the eaves. If he was discovered by Heaven's eye, everything would be for naught. Sure enough, not long after Silen left, a huge explosion woke up the people who were still asleep. A mushroom cloud surged into the sky, a dazzling fire, a large crater on the ground, and the surrounding buildings that had collapsed due to the explosion. Broken walls and ruins were everywhere. The awakened children were crying and shouting, and the adults were cursing incessantly. Before some curious people could approach the scene of the explosion, a white light fell from the sky, enveloping the area of the explosion in a white light cage, isolating it from the outside world. The Sky Eye had already responded, and it was believed that it would not be long before the patrols of the security team came here to understand the situation. However, that was not what Silen needed to pay attention to. After sneaking back to his small house of 10 square meters in the poor area, his highly tense nerves slowly relaxed and he fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 4. In his dreams, some information recorded in his brain flashed, and Silen's body was also changing. When he opened his eyes again, it was already 2 days later. Silen did not go to old Devon's shop, but to his master Jenya's residence. Silen was picked up by Jenya in the forest west of the town. At that time, because of an abnormal stellar flare, the crops of the surrounding planets had failed, and the price of nutrient supplements had skyrocketed. To the poor, it was a disaster. Many people starved to death, and the children who could not feed themselves were sold to the rich in the bustling city. Silen was one of the children who could not be sold in time. That day, a chaotic battle broke out in the forest west of the town because of food. When Jenya arrived, only Silen, who was still swaddled in a tree hole, was still alive. Jenya was only a 7-element genotype rank F, but he lived better than a D rank, and was even stronger. Jenya taught Silen a set of fitness methods. Compared to the fitness methods Silen had seen on TV, Jenya's set was improved on the human body's dynamics and other aspects. And these fitness methods were later used by Silen to hunt. Jenya once said that this bodybuilding method was originally adapted from a martial arts technique. It had removed the killing power and added a little more peace, but Silen had slowly restored the parts that had been removed through practice. Jenya passed away when Silen was 12. No one knew how old Jenya was, and the only thing Silen knew was that his master was not simple. Every month, Silen would come over to clean up Jenya's house. The decorations in the house were not shabby, and it gave off a peaceful and simple feeling, just like Jenya himself, not showing off the scenery. He clearly did not lack money, but he was willing to live in this poor area quietly. There was a huge tree more than 20 meters tall in the backyard, its huge crown covering most of the yard. Jenya said that this tree might be the only one in the entire galaxy. A wooden rocking chair lay quietly under the tree. Jenya always liked to lie on the rocking chair and murmur. The chair creaked as it swayed, as if the gears of time were turning. Silen walked to the tree and took out the crystal-like pendant hanging around his neck. "Master, Hannah and I are here to see you." In Silen's world, there was only Jenya and Hannah. Old Devon could barely be considered one of them, but now that Jenya and Hannah were gone, old Devon was about to start a new life of his own. He leaned against the tree and sat down. Through the gaps between the leaves, he could see the tiny specks of light sprinkling down, but he couldn't feel much warmth. "I'm the only one left." Silen raised his arm and activated the AI chip according to the information in his mind. Looking at his hands now, they clearly looked no different from before, but they could easily penetrate a 10-centimeter thick steel plate, just like the perverted old man from before, who could easily crush an alloy dagger. He hadn't digested much of the information recorded in his mind, so he only had some basic knowledge. For example, the control of his body's muscles, the activation and silence of his genes. Something worth mentioning was that due to the integration of the AI chip, Silen's genotype was now B rank. Before Jenya closed his eyes, he told Silen that if Silen's genotype reached C rank one day, he could open the box in his room. If he couldn't, he should never open it. Getting up, Silen walked into the room Genya used to live in and opened the cupboard. Inside was a small wooden box. There was an invisible protective membrane around the box, which was used to check one's gene rank. Silen had been sent flying when his genotype was F rank. He put his hand on the transparent membrane again, and the faint glow spread until it disappeared. Silen took the box out. The key to opening it was Silen's genetic information, the double code in his genome and mitochondrial DNA. Pack, the box opened. Genya's image appeared. Although it was only the size of a palm, it was very clear. Silen, the fact that you're able to open this box means that not only is your genotype at C rank, you're also younger than 50. Silen raised an eyebrow. He didn't expect Genya to set an age limit. Silen, if you plan to go out into space, then continue. If not, then close the box and never open it. This is an order from your master. Silen didn't move. After a while, the image flickered and became clear again. Since you've chosen to go out into space, do me a favor. Take the ring in the box with you. If the ring reacts one day, send me home. Hearing Genya's voice, Silen would be lying if he said he wasn't shocked. The ring was actually a subspace ring. This kind of technology couldn't be produced on the planet Silen was from. Only the super-rich in the prosperous central area would have them. It was a luxury among luxury items, but Genya actually had one. Moreover, Silen could feel that it was even more intricate and complicated than the subspace rings and necklaces of the rich. The more Genya spoke, the more Silen felt that Genya's identity wasn't simple. The tree in the yard is called the Fuji tree. My family's emblem is the Fuji leaf. The upper tree Fuji, Gen family. I haven't heard of it since I came to this area. It turned out that when Genya was young, he was mischievous and accidentally drove his family's spaceship into the Devil's Zone. A wormhole suddenly appeared and swallowed the spaceship he was in. He arrived in this foreign star system and his spaceship was destroyed. After wandering around for a while, he arrived at planet X, C362, which was the planet he was now on. Although Genya didn't explain many details, Silen could guess some of it. Before the ring reacts, do not mention the Gen family or the upper tree Fuji. After explaining, the image disappeared, leaving behind a wood-like ring. The ring looked a little big, so Silen put it on his left thumb. The moment he put it on, the originally wood-like ring suddenly turned into a curled leaf-shaped green pattern that stuck closely to his skin. It didn't look like a ring at all, but a tattoo that couldn't be removed no matter how hard he tried. No matter how he rubbed it, it felt like he was rubbing a tattoo that couldn't be erased. Fuck, he shouldn't have put it on his thumb. Who would tattoo a curled leaf on their thumb? Following Genya's instructions, Silen dug out Genya's coffin that was buried under the Fuji tree in the yard. Back then, he didn't cremate it with electricity. Instead, he followed Genya's will and buried him in a coffin made from the Fuji tree. Of course, only Silen and Hannah knew about this. Without touching the coffin, Silen pointed the leaf pattern on his thumb at the coffin. With a flash of green light, the coffin was sucked into the ring. Silen could feel where the coffin was in the ring. Moreover, Silen knew that there was still a lot of space in the ring, enough to store for a long journey. After setting up everything in the yard, Silen kissed the pendant hanging on his finger. Looking at the leaf pattern on his thumb, he smiled and said, "The three of us are going on an adventure." Chapter 5. Because of the explosion, the public security officer had personally come to supervise, and the people living around the explosion area would be interrogated every day, causing panic among the people. Many shops in town were not open, so even if Silen did not go to the bar, no one would notice. Moreover, the place where Silen lived was the poorest area, so the patrolman only symbolically interrogated a few people before leaving, without questioning Silen. Returning to the streets of town once more, Silen did not plan to open the bar for business. Instead, he contacted old Devon. After all, he needed to inform the boss about the shop's matters. Old Devon was currently in the midst of a passionate love affair, his face glowing. Just like old Devon's former dream, he had found a suitable age, an E-rank genotype woman, and was planning to get married and live the rest of his life. Hearing Scylla say that he was preparing to go out and explore, old Devon thought that Scylla just wanted to go to the prosperous areas to try his luck, and as a senior, he did not say anything more after giving some advice. Young people were impulsive, and it was a good thing to have pursuits. There was no way he would stay in that poor, trashy place for the rest of his life. After all, Scylla was only 17 years old. Old Devon did not plan to return, and gave this little shop to Scylla. After all, the location of the bar was not good, and even if it was sold, it would not sell for much. Old Devon did not know many people in the city, and could not help Scylla in terms of connections, so he was prepared to give Scylla some more money, but was rejected by Scylla. After rejecting old Devon, Scylla told old Devon to take care and ended the conversation. His savings were far greater than what old Devon had imagined. Scylla did not plan to sell the bar immediately, but sublet it to the people who lived in the same poor area, and let them transfer the rent to his carry account every year. Scylla returned to his little poor house and packed his things. That night, he went to Jenya's residence once more. Unlike last time, he did it in a very secretive manner. This was because the matter this time was very important, and Jenya's residence's defenses were very effective at shielding internal and external signals. It added an extra layer of security. Inside the room, Scylla relaxed his body and began to guide the changes inside his body. The chips that had been integrated into his body's genes had seeped into every cell in his body as the host replicated and spread through his bloodstream. Right now, Scylla's goal was to allow these chips to selectively express themselves. Of course, since the chips hadn't reached 100% when they were first activated, there was a limit to how much they could express themselves. The command was sent from the brain, and every central information was transmitted to the chip inside every cell. The chip began to selectively express itself, and the expression of the original genome was also disrupted and changed. The most obvious change was Scylla's appearance. His facial bones began to change. The color of his hair, eyes, and skin began to change. Even his skeleton began to change. This was not a temporary stain, nor was it a plastic surgery, but a genetic change. Even the most advanced instruments could not detect it, because this was a change controlled from the very source. This was Scylla's trump card. According to the data and information Horley left behind, in theory, the main body could control the chips to recombine, break, delete, or mutate the original DNA in the cells. For example, if someone wanted to examine Scylla's DNA information, then Scylla could control his body fluids, hair, or other cells in other parts of his body to change the moment before they left the body, making it impossible for others to detect Scylla's true DNA information. However, because the chips had not been completely activated, every time a large change was made, a period of stabilization was needed before the changes could be controlled from the very source. The crisp sounds of bones cracking stopped, and when Scylla felt that the changes in the other parts of his body had also ended, he looked at his reflection in the mirror and was a little speechless. The original black hair, black eyes, and wheat-colored skin of a healthy, sunny young man had turned into light gray hair, dark blue eyes, pale skin, and a slightly thinner skeleton than before. No matter how he looked at it, he looked like one of those rich kids in the city. Although his face was not extraordinarily handsome, it was still handsome and stylish. Overall, he did not look as domineering as before. Scylla frowned, not very satisfied with this appearance, but because the activation of the chips was not perfect, he could not do anything about some of the changes on the surface. Forget it, this is it, I'll make do with it for now. Jenya once said that there were only two kinds of people who could change the world, gods and madmen. Scylla felt that old man Ori belonged to the latter. As for whether he could reach the level of glory and code, it remained to be seen. However, it had to be said that Ori was a genius. With only that kind of equipment, most of it was done by hand, he could actually create such a crazy thing. Scylla spent a lot of money to buy a blank identity card from the black market. The identity serial number and magnetic seal on it could be verified by the authorities. Sillin entered his name and the picture of his current face and other fake information, then swiped it in the card slot of a device beside him. The screen showed Sillin's current identity information. As long as the authorities did not spend a lot of effort to check, this identity card would not be suspected by the inspectors. Apart from the identity card, Sillin also bought a galactic savings card from the underground black market. After a series of complicated and careful operations, Sillin deposited the rest of his money into this carry card. For these two cards, Sillin spent a few million star coins, and now his savings were less than a tenth. Moreover, it was important to know that it was impossible to obtain these things with money alone without the channels. This was also the benefit of Sillin's 3 years as a hunter. The next day, Sillin, who had changed drastically, boarded the flight XC-362 to XC-100 with a light body. The airport security check and identity information did not encounter any obstacles. Sillin sat on the passenger starship's chair and touched the curly leaf pattern on his left thumb. The security check did not detect anything at all. If it was a normal subspace item, it would not have gone so smoothly, not to mention that there were dangerous items such as guns. He pressed a button on the chair, and an image appeared in front of him, showing the scene outside the starship. Although Sillin lived in a poor town, he had been to many places on this planet as a shadow hunter. Now that he thought about it, it was a different feeling, a mixture of emotions. The towering skyscrapers, the bustling city, they gradually became smaller and blurry, and the entire view of the planet appeared before his eyes. For the first time, Sillin saw the true face of the Sky Eye, a satellite array. They monitored the entire view of the ground and could take immediate measures, just like the protective light shield that night to control the area of destruction of the explosion. Sillin took out the pendant on his neck to let it have a good look at the planet. Hina, Master, we're leaving. I don't know when we'll be back. Chapter 6. Planet XC-100 was equivalent to a transportation hub in Sector X. Most of the sectors divided by the Galactic Alliance were located on Planet XC-100. Tens of thousands of airplanes and spaceships took off and landed every day, and Sillin's target was Sector D-M, one of the 10 fast-developing, free trade sectors in the Galactic Alliance. Sector X was just a lagging zone. As for Sector A to C, it wasn't easy to gain a foothold there. Sector A had many political organizations, and the Galactic Alliance's coalition government was located there. Sector B had many academies and a lot of financial and trade centers. As for Sector C, it was mostly a military location, and the most famous military academy of the League of Stars, the League of Stars Military Academy, was located there. Sector A, B, and C were called the Shining 3-Star Zones by the people of the League of Stars. It wasn't a place just anyone could go. The waters were too deep, and there was no telling when they would be destroyed inexplicably. Sitting in a restaurant near the airport, Sillin held his chin and looked at the scenery outside. Compared to the chaotic splendor of planet Brown Earth, everything on transit planet XC-100 was orderly and orderly. From large cargo ships to small flying cars flying above the streets, everything was orderly. Sector X's transportation hub lived up to its name. Sillin bought a tabloid newspaper. The flashing animations and resounding names on the newspaper always made people feel that every day was fresh. Sillin drank the tea in his cup. The tickets to Sector K had already been bought, and all Sillin had to do was wait. Whether it was his sitting posture, drinking tea, or holding the newspaper, Sillin gave off the feeling that he was extremely cultured. This was something he had been raised by Genya since he was young, and there was no way anyone could tell that he came from the slums. Of course, this was just a disguise. Coupled with his current appearance, Sillin thought that he could easily give off the impression of a ruffian. "Hey sweetheart, do you still have a free table?" A young man with brown, shoulder-length curly hair, wearing a pair of sunglasses and somewhat fancy clothes walked into the shop with a large black suitcase. The 2 buttons on his chest were undone, revealing his strong chest muscles to show off his explosive masculinity. He was teasing the waitress, and his eyes were unabashedly staring at the waitress's perky breasts. There was clearly a robot attendant beside him, but he just had to approach the waitress on the other side of the counter. This kind of flirting was very common, and the waitress was obviously not surprised by such a situation. She still replied with a smile, "I'm sorry, there are no empty tables, but there are still empty seats. Would you like to wait first, or go to the empty seats and, oh, so it's already gone. What a pity." The young man glanced around the shop through his sunglasses and his gaze finally stopped at Silen's table. "That table, I'll squeeze with that little friend." "Okay, please." The waitress's smile was a little stiff. That was a standard 6-person table, and now there was only one person there. If this person was included, there would only be 2 people. How could it be squeezed? Although there were quite a few tables in the shop that were only occupied by 1 or 2 people, Diaz chose this table out of all the others. Diaz felt that this kid gave him a very strange feeling that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Moreover, he also looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Putting the suitcase in his hand aside casually, Diaz sat opposite Silen. Even though he was in the shop, he did not plan to take off his sunglasses. For the time being, he could sum it up as acting cool. After taking the menu from the waitress, his finger kept sliding on it, switching and choosing the menu images one by one. "Okay, I'll order these first." "Okay, please wait a moment." After ordering the menu, Diaz said to Silen, who was really reading the newspaper, "Hey, little friend, are you waiting for your flight?" Silen raised his head and smiled elegantly. With a, "I'm very cultured" expression, he replied, "Yes, uncle." Uncle. This bastard actually called the handsome, radiant, and charming me uncle. If this was one of his subordinates, Diaz would have slapped them with his shoe a long time ago. However, interesting. From the moment Diaz walked into the shop, Silen had been paying attention to this guy. Even though he knew nothing about this young man, Silen felt that this person was very strong, stronger than anyone he had met before. Silen did not show any anger towards the other person calling him a 17-year-old little guy. Instead, he responded with uncle. Diaz laughed, picked up the wine glass that had been served and drained it in one gulp. "I'm waiting too. I've already bought a ticket to Sector K. What about you?" "Me too." "Yo, it looks like we're fated." The waitress who had served the desserts rolled her eyes on the inside when she heard this. "Fated? Fated my ass. 80% of the people sitting here are waiting for the flight to Sector K. So this is the only fated person in your eyes? Do you think the rest are all half-evolved gorillas?" "Thanks, sweetheart." As he said this, Diaz's hand even brushed lightly across the back of the waitress's white and tender hand in a very provocative manner. "You're welcome." With a smile on his face, he ignored her decisively. Diaz, on the other hand, didn't mind. He turned around and began chatting with Silen as if nothing had happened. He made small comments about today's news, and most of them were disdain and criticism. Most of the time, Silen listened quietly and only nodded or said a few words when Diaz asked a question. Meanwhile, Diaz but gradually moved towards Silen. Although Silen looked relaxed on the surface, his heart was tense and all his muscles were ready to move at any moment. "Aya, you haven't introduced yourself yet." Diaz moved closer to Silen and said mysteriously with undisguised pride on his face, "My name is Diaz." Once he was done, Diaz leaned backwards against the soft back of the chair, crossed his arms and smiled smugly. The translation of his expression was, "Admire me. Worship me. Have you seen a god?" Every table was surrounded by transparent light partitions. The people on the other side of the light partitions could not hear the conversation on this side. Moreover, when Diaz said this, he intentionally or unintentionally used his arm to block the light partitions. The people outside could not see the shape of Diaz's lips, so it was impossible to judge what he was saying based on the shape of his lips. Silen blinked. For a moment, he did not understand why this guy was so smug. "Oh. My name is Silen." Silen's reaction really made Diaz choke for a moment. "That's not right. If he was from those families, it was impossible for him not to know me. Diaz looked at Scylla with a strange expression, and then said with great interest, "You're so funny." "Scylla, where did this funny come from?" "Ahem, so we're considered to know each other." "Scylla, nice to meet you." Diaz extended his hand. Scylla looked at Diaz's extended hand and was stunned for a second. Then, he smiled and extended his hand. "I'm also very happy to meet you, Mr. Diaz." Both hands shook for a moment, but Scylla's heart was really shocked. After touching the other person, the chip in his body would feed back information, and through the feedback from the chip, Scylla knew that this Diaz's gene level was actually A. Scylla had also met some people here, but the highest among them was only B level. This person in front of him was actually A level. Scylla did not expect to meet someone of this level so soon. "Hunter." Shaking hands was generally not a formal greeting, but hunters liked to shake hands and hug, because during the process, there would be a competition. The collision of strength was an effective way for most hunters to communicate. To accept this greeting, one would not be able to accept it without a certain degree of courage. Perhaps overestimating one's strength would lead to serious injuries or even death. However, when Diaz saw that Scylla had accepted the greeting after a brief moment of surprise, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This guy's got some balls. Although Diaz himself didn't do anything petty during the handshake, the fact that he was able to return the handshake so calmly and fearlessly proved that this kid was quite interesting. Or should I say that his brain was damaged? Or should he say that he was a real person who did not show his true colors? Probably the latter, Diaz thought to himself. However, looking at Scylla's reaction, it seemed that he really did not know him. Which family did this guy come from? Scylla said that his name was Scylla, but he did not say anything about his surname. As for Diaz, it was not appropriate for him to ask. He was really curious. Just then, the flight announcement rang, and more than 80% of the people in the restaurant got up and went to the station. Diaz stubbornly followed Scylla into the station. There were a total of thousands of people on this flight, and Scylla did not sit in the first or third class cabin, but chose the middle class cabin. Unexpectedly, Diaz also chose the middle class cabin, and Diaz purposely swapped seats with someone and sat next to Scylla. Even in the passenger cabin, Diaz did not have any intention of taking off the sunglasses on his face. Scylla had a feeling that this flight would not be so smooth. Chapter 7. The seats were three connected. Diaz sat on the right of Scylla, and on the left of Scylla sat a boy about the same age as him. After the boy sat down, he twisted his buttocks for a long time. He seemed a little anxious. After seeing Scylla frowning slightly, he twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "Bro, don't be nervous. The flight path of the passenger ship departing from planet X, C-100 has been precisely calculated. Unlike the passenger ships of other planets, the safety factor is dozens of times higher. The probability of encountering magnetic field abnormalities is less than 0.1%, and the probability of encountering interstellar robbers is even smaller. Also, the flights of X, C-100 are protected by special laws." Listening to the boy's self-comforting nagging, Scylla caught a glimpse of Diaz's slightly upturned mouth and felt that this guy's smile was a bit malicious. After the passenger ship entered warp speed, some of the conversations gradually stopped. The passengers needed to spend more energy to suppress the discomfort they felt in such a state. Celine, on the other hand, closed her eyes, placed the back of the chair flat, pulled the blanket over her, and began to sleep. Diaz looked at Scylla's reaction and only felt amused. This little guy slept soundly. It seemed that he was used to it. Both his physical and psychological quality were very good. Little did he know that this was actually the first time Scylla slept during warp flight. However, even in sleep, every hair on Scylla's body was aware of the surrounding situation, especially the murderous aura. As long as there was a little bit, Scylla would wake up from his sleep. However, not long after Scylla slept, a sudden shake woke Scylla up. Electromagnetic interference and obstacle force field affect the control of the steering wheel, and the pulse power operation is also abnormal. Such changes will not allow the operating system to last long. The passenger ship is getting out of warp state. Diaz calmly analyzed the current situation. It's probably external deliberate interference. If I'm right, we've encountered interstellar robbers. When the boy next to Scylla heard the words, electromagnetic interference and barrier field, his face turned pale with fright. Diaz's last words, interstellar robbers, undoubtedly gave the boy an unbearable blow. Therefore, the poor boy fainted immediately. Diaz's voice was not loud, and only Scylla and the other two could hear him. However, the other passengers had their own guesses, and the one thing they all had in common was panic. There was another wave of violent shaking. After the magnetic sound of the electric current, a low and arrogant voice resounded throughout the entire passenger ship. I'm sorry, dear passengers, but we are temporarily taking over this ship. If you don't want to die, then stay in your seats. The guns in our hands can't communicate. Oh, by the way, I don't like noise. If anyone yells too loudly, then they'll have to accompany the rubble floating in space. Interstellar robbers. For a moment, the cabin was filled with rapid and anxious breathing and whimpering. Scylla analyzed in his heart. Since this group of robbers dared to hijack the passenger ship of Planet X, C-100, they must have made careful plans. They evaded the patrolling security team and took down all the guards on the passenger ship in a short period of time without causing a violent confrontation or explosion. This was enough to show that there was a 90% chance that they had already arranged accomplices on the ship. And due to the protection of the relevant special laws, those who wantonly killed passengers on a transit planet's passenger ship would be cruelly hunted down by the military. Judging from the tone of the robbers, at this stage, this group of robbers would not kill the people on the passenger ship for the time being. It was estimated that the guards were only temporarily incapacitated. However, everything was uncertain. After all, robbers were robbers. Who knew if they would shoot you because they were not pleasing to the eye? Glancing at Diaz, who was leisurely swinging his legs next to him, Scylla felt that this must have something to do with this guy. Sigh. He was caught in the crossfire. However, Scylla was more curious in his heart. What was this grade A guy next to him trying to do? Not long after, more than a dozen robbers wearing hideous masks walked in with guns. They walked straight to Diaz and pointed their guns at Diaz. Get up and come with us. Diaz was quite cooperative. He stretched out his arms and spread his fingers, indicating that he had no intention of resisting. Oh, by the way, Diaz, who had taken 2 steps, turned around and said to Scylla, hey, bro, help me keep an eye on my food. I haven't eaten much of that box of compressed burrito yet. Scylla's eyebrows twitched. Fuck. Do I know you that well? What does it have to do with me that you haven't finished your burrito? Besides, in this situation, who would be so bored as to snatch your half-eaten burrito with obvious teeth marks? You're obviously trying to drag me down with you. Sure enough, the leader of the robbers pointed a gun at Scylla and said, take him away too. Scylla had no doubt that Diaz's eyes behind the sunglasses were full of a sly smile. The other people in the cabin didn't even dare to breathe, for fear that they would be targeted by the robbers. Scylla and Diaz were taken to the main control room under the watchful eyes of more than a dozen guns. The original captain and helmsman were left in a corner unconscious. As Scylla expected, these robbers didn't kill them, but he didn't know what would happen next. Boss, I've brought them. The man sitting in the captain's seat turned around and played with a gun in his hand. He was also wearing a mask, but he didn't look at Scylla. Instead, he stared straight at Diaz and asked, where's the thing? They had already gone through all the luggage stored in the luggage compartment, but they didn't find what they were looking for. Diaz didn't pretend to be confused and said, it's on me. The hand that was playing with the gun paused and said in a deep voice, take it out. Nearly 20 guns were pointed at Diaz. As long as this guy made the slightest movement, they would shoot. Diaz shrugged and said, I'm telling you, I can give you the thing, but don't fire your guns. If I die, you won't get the thing." As he said that, Diaz shook his arm and a silver ring slid from his arm to his wrist. He didn't know where the ring was touched, but the thin ring turned into a 3 centimeter wide bracelet. A subspace product. Moreover, the quality was not just average. Just a single ring like this was worth a lot more than this passenger ship. The robbers were all knowledgeable people. Even though they were wearing masks, Scylla could tell that their eyes were glowing with greed. Diaz took out a big black box. Scylla had seen this box in the restaurant before. He really didn't expect that this box that Diaz was openly carrying around would be the robber's target. Scylla didn't doubt the value of the thing inside, but wasn't Diaz too ostentatious? On purpose, this guy definitely did it on purpose. All of Scylla's muscles were ready. Diaz was full of evil tricks. He would never compromise so easily. After Diaz took out the box, he threw it to the man sitting in the captain's seat. Just as the man was about to catch the box, all the lights in the control room went out. Fuck. This guy really made a move. The moment before the lights went out, Scylla saw a spot on Diaz's bracelet flash. At the same time, it was accompanied by a strange interference wave. These interference waves were undetectable to most people, but the chip in Scylla's body reacted. Therefore, Scylla reacted immediately and hurriedly dodged. Sure enough, gunshots and lasers flew everywhere in the darkness. Diaz made a move. Scylla didn't need to wear night vision lenses at all. His eyes changed spontaneously. The columnar cells on his retina grew, and his pupils expanded to 90% of the surface of his eyeball. The light emitted when a laser gun fired was enough for Scylla to clearly see the situation in the control room. Moreover, with so many guns firing at the same time, it was like installing a searchlight for Scylla. Diaz was worthy of being an A-rank genotype. His actions were crisp and precise, and he hit the target in one hit. He didn't even use a weapon. In a breath's time, he took down more than half of the robbers here. He didn't kill the robbers directly, but only incapacitated them. Scylla didn't think that Diaz was soft-hearted. From a hunter's point of view, a robber alive was worth more than a dead one. One of the robbers took out a backup light source, but even with a light source, it was difficult for them to capture Diaz's figure. It was too fast. They didn't even have time to aim. Moreover, these robbers probably didn't think that the entire control room would be completely dark. They didn't even bring their infrared goggles or scanning electron goggles with them. The entire process took less than 10 seconds. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to describe these robbers as utterly defeated. The disparity between the strong and the weak was obvious. The last robber was very smart. He lifted an unconscious staff member in front of him and prepared to use him as a hostage. But before he could speak, his throat made a cracking sound, and he became the only dead person among the robbers in the control room. I hate it when people threaten me. Diaz's tone was calm and without the slightest hint of confusion. It was as if he was stating a common fact that everyone knew. After the matter was settled, all the light sources were turned back on, and the control room was once again bright. Scylla's eyes also returned to normal. Without looking at Scylla, who was standing on the side, Diaz fiddled with a few controls. A large screen unfolded, and the crisscrossing coordinate lines moved quickly. Then, it locked onto a few fast-moving dots of light. They were the robbers who were originally patrolling other parts of the cabin and had fled after realizing that the situation wasn't good. After locking onto the targets, Diaz didn't hesitate to use the photon torpedo that was installed on the passenger ship. The corner of Scylla's mouth twitched. Didn't he need to enter several passwords to use the photon torpedo on the passenger ship? Did this guy do it so quickly? The light from the explosions exploded like fireworks, and the fighter planes that the fleeing robbers were on were blown to pieces. Yeah. Diaz hummed a little tune and danced. After picking up the box that had fallen to the ground, he walked in front of Scylla. The security team will be here in a minute. Hey, Scylla, I don't want to criticize you, but when you hear about interstellar robbers, you should be panicking. When you see their guns, you should be terrified, not calm like you're having facial paralysis. Because the passengers' expressions and every move will be recorded by the surveillance cameras installed on the passenger ship. If you act like this, it's obvious that you're up to no good. The security team will take you back and interrogate you harshly. Diaz specifically emphasized the word harshly. Silen glanced at Diaz. So, didn't you deliberately sit next to me to drag me into this mess? Diaz chuckled and didn't deny it. For a robber incident, the passenger transport company and the security team will compensate the passengers. If you're willing to harm yourself, they'll give even more. Silen didn't comment. Chapter 8. Diaz took out a dark gold book and wrote something with a grin on his face. Then, he happily tore off the top page and pasted it on the most conspicuous spot at the entrance. After pasting it, the palm-sized piece of paper expanded to the size of a black suitcase. On top of it was a dazzling number and a knife-shaped symbol. This thing that looked like a notice was a receipt. When Silen saw the symbol, his pupils shrank and his heart skipped a beat. Vanguard. The symbol of Vanguard, one of the 4 great hunter regiments in the League of Stars. The 4 great hunter regiments were different from hunters that acted alone or in small groups. Their goals were bigger, so big that it made people gasp in amazement. They were involved in the discovery of new habitable planets, the development of regions, and the trading of large amounts of mineral resources. Their goals could be a family, an organization, a city, or even a planet or an unknown region in the galaxy, and they had the ability to complete it. These were not things that ordinary hunters could handle. It was worth mentioning that the electronic magazine Brave, which had a contribution of more than 80 points, was only inferior to Glory and Code in the Star Alliance. In every issue, information about the 4 great hunter groups occupied 80% of the page. One could imagine the influence of the 4 great hunter groups. They were existences that even the government had to be wary of. The security team came in a hurry, but when the captain of the security team walked into the control room and saw the flashing notice, his face, which was already a little dark, suddenly turned as black as coal, and a layer of his face could be scraped off. When he looked up again, someone was sitting on the captain's chair with his legs crossed, nibbling on a fruit with a crisp sound. Reporting, Captain. There are a total of 24 robbers on the ship. 23 are unconscious, 1 is dead, and some of the passengers have minor injuries. No fatalities. Currently being comforted, listening to his subordinate's report, the security team leader's face turned darker and darker. He wanted to rush over and strangle the robbers to death. Robbery? Fight my ass. They didn't even know the other party's background before taking action. Robbing an A-rank experienced hunter. Are they a bunch of idiots? Not only was it a robbery, but they were also toyed with by the other party like they were children. A living robber was worth more than a dead one. The price would at least double. How much money would the security team have to report? Most importantly, the people who caught the robbers were the ones that the security team wanted to avoid but couldn't. Speaking of which, why did this guy come to a poor place like Sector X? Logically speaking, Sector X was the most meaningless place to explore. The more the security team leader thought about it, the angrier he became. The blue veins on his forehead bulged, and he kicked several subordinates beside him out of the door. The vice-captain, who had followed along, was a little dissatisfied. Even if he was lecturing his subordinates, he couldn't do it in front of outsiders. Wasn't this exposing his own family's shame? However, when he looked up and saw the dazzling notice, his expression changed instantly. He turned around and kicked the people behind him with a livid expression. It seemed that their security team was going to be scolded when they reported back. For example, do the security team guys eat shit? Have your brains aged? They can't even defend against such robbers. Why the fuck are those money-sucking vampires here? The moment he thought about it, the security team leader's facial muscles began to twitch uncontrollably. Vanguard Division 6 Vice Captain, Diaz. I've heard a lot about you. Because Scylla didn't come into contact with Vanguard's level of information, he only knew about the 4 great hunter regiments. He didn't know much about the B squadrons. No wonder Dias's expression was so strange when he saw Scylla's calm reaction after reporting his name. However, Scylla was truly surprised. Wasn't Dias a little too young to be the vice-captain of Vanguard's B squadron? He didn't look more than 10 years older than Scylla. Seeing the security team captain walk over, Dias was still sitting on the captain's seat with a golden saber. He wasn't surprised to hear the other party mention his name and origin, and said with a smile, "Yo, you've been recognized." The faces of the security team members turned a little green. Who in the security team didn't know about the knife-shaped symbol on that notice? They had a corresponding understanding of every fleet, and they had done their homework on the 6th Fleet's recent activities in the surrounding sectors. Several core members of the 6th Division had even been blacklisted, and they were basically guarding against them like thieves. They didn't expect to run into them in the end. According to the relevant laws and contracts, you have to pay me a certain amount of money. I've pasted the bill over there, and I hope you can fulfill it as soon as possible. Of course. The security team captain almost squeezed out the 2 words through his teeth. Their hearts were bleeding. The higher-ups would definitely deduct their pay. Who asked the money-sucking vampires hunters to deal with the robbers and not the security team? It was at this moment all the signal receivers and displays in the control room started to lose control. "There's an external signal," a crew member shouted. Just as he finished speaking, a powerful rhythm of music started playing. 6 consecutive gun-like sounds appeared one after another in a certain rhythm, interspersed with music that sounded like a string of beads. The data and images displayed on all the electronic screens in the starship also jumped to the same rhythm. The noisy crowd in the cabin immediately quieted down, and a bewitching power that made everyone's heartbeat almost synchronized spread along with the music. The music carried a powerful force and gradually turned ancient and distant, like a sharp knife that pierced through every space. Audio interference, signal assimilation. This was the first time Scylla had experienced something like this. He had only heard about it on television or in magazines before, but it was still much more shocking to experience it in person. The prelude signal music of the Hunter Regiment was the same as the emblem of the Hunter Regiment. It was a symbol. There would be some differences between the B squadrons under the Hunter Regiment. For example, the 6 accents just now meant that it was someone from the 6th Division of Vanguard. A starship instantly appeared on the display screen, and above this starship, a huge knife-shaped cursor appeared. Next to the knife was the number 6. Vanguard Division 6. "Oh, my people are here to pick me up. Sigh, I was going to take a passenger ship." Dias's tone was regretful, but his expression was smug. The people of the security team wanted nothing more than to serve him with their guns. A face with an ostentatious smile suddenly appeared on the control room's display screen. "Vice Captain, are you going to teleport or do you want to come here yourself?" The people of the security team were furious. They glared fiercely at the person in charge of operating the starship's control room. The person had an innocent look on his face. The speed at which the other party could remotely control the starship's display screen was completely unstoppable. "Nonsense, of course it's teleportation." "Oh right, set it to 2 people. I'll bring a little guy over." Scylla had a bad feeling. Dias roared at the screen and then turned to look at Scylla. "Sigh, Scylla, come with your big brother to take a spin on the starship." White light enveloped the 2 of them, and in the blink of an eye, they disappeared from the control room. The captain of the security team's face was gloomy. He said to the person at the control panel, "Get the information about the 2 of them on the starship." All the information, videos, etc. about the 2 of them have been deleted." The operator was trembling with fear. "Trash." The captain of the security team smashed the chair next to him with a punch. The group of people hung their heads and silently cursed. The other party was from Vanguard. How could they be easily dealt with? On the other side. After Scylla was teleported to the Vanguard's 6th Division starship, he said to Dias, "I still have luggage on the starship. Diaz didn't care. The items in the warehouse aren't important. They're dispensable to you. As he spoke, a voice called out from afar. Vice Captain, you're finally back. The figure rushed over like the wind. Just when Scylla thought that the two of them were going to put on a show of a subordinate greeting a superior with glory, the person's next sentence was in an impolite tone. Where's the stuff? Diaz seemed to be used to this kind of situation. He directly threw the 5 boxes over. Among them was the big box that Scylla had seen before. The box was made of a special anti-radiation material. The things inside should be energy. After carrying the 5 boxes, the person turned around happily and was ready to leave. Hey, Carrie, what's the hurry? Didn't you see that I brought a guest over? Diaz grabbed Carrie's ear and said, but there was no hint of blame in his tone. Carrie bared his teeth, indicating that Diaz should be lenient on his ear. Scylla knew that Carrie was deliberately ignoring him. Before he was recognized, he wouldn't respect you. Carrie carried the 5 boxes in one hand and freed his other hand. He rubbed his ear and stretched it over. There was a formal smile on his face. There was no sincerity at all when he was facing Diaz. Hello. A handshake. Chapter 9. Carrie would not be as courteous as Diaz. Diaz, on the other hand, stood at the side and watched the show with a smile. Scylla smiled and extended his hand. Hello. Neither of them introduced themselves. Then, an undercurrent surged. As soon as their hands met, Carrie began to exert force. 30% strength, 40% strength, all the way to 80% strength. Carrie wondered if the hand he was holding was made of special alloy. It was so fucking hard. He did not let the other suffer, but his own hand was hurting from the grip. What shocked Carrie the most was that the other did not use any strength and allowed him to exert force. Scylla was secretly shocked. Another A-rank genotype. Since when did A-rank genotypes become like cabbages? The Big Four hunter regiments were indeed the Big Four. Carrie was conflicted. Fuck, I don't believe it. Carrie threw the 5 boxes in his hands to the side and joined the fight with both hands. This shameless bastard. In the starship's main control room, a group of people were watching the scene on the screen and criticizing Carrie. Carrie's shamelessness had long been deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts. From the moment Scylla was transported into this starship, someone had begun to analyze him. The result of the calculation was that this youth brought by Diaz had a 90% chance of being a B-rank genotype. Bullying the weak, using a high-rank genotype to bully a low-rank genotype, and using 2 hands if one hand was not enough. Diaz coughed awkwardly at Carrie's shameless behavior, but at the same time, he was quite shocked at Scylla's ability. To be able to force out Carrie's shamelessness was not something an ordinary person could do. When Carrie exerted his strength, Scylla solidified his entire arm. Even if Carrie was an A-rank genotype, he couldn't do anything to him. There wouldn't be too much of a change even if he used both of his arms at the same time. However, Scylla didn't go overboard with his arrogance. It was enough to let these people know that he wasn't as easy to bully as a clay figurine. You're too enthusiastic. Scylla smiled and extended his other hand. Hands to hands. Carrie's face was a little distorted. Ouch, ouch, ouch. I'm not coming anymore. I'm not coming. Carrie withdrew his hand and looked at his reddened palm. He wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Vice Captain, what's the background of this little brother you brought? Isn't this too abnormal? The fact that Carrie was able to change the way he addressed him to little brother meant that he had recognized Scylla's ability. You suffered a loss, didn't you? Diaz kicked Carrie aside and pointed at the 5 boxes on the ground. Hurry up and get to work. Yes. Carrie picked up the box and walked a few steps before turning around to ask Scylla, my name is Carrie, an A-rank combatant of the 6th team. Who are you, young man? My name is Scylla, a free man. Carrie's mouth had turned into an O shape. He winked at Diaz. Vice Captain, a free man. Hurry up and make this guy stay. Hurry up and scram. Diaz scolded with a smile. I'm scramming, hee hee. In an instant, Carrie disappeared without a trace. There were two reasons why Diaz had brought Sillin over. First, he wanted to find out more about this kid's background. He felt that this kid was somewhat familiar, but he really couldn't recall where. Second, which was also the most important reason, was to recruit this kid if he hadn't joined any organization. Currently, the sixth team was in need of manpower. Diaz believed in Sillin's character, and even more so, he believed in his own judgment. In order to allow Sillin to grasp the current situation faster, Diaz told Sillin the whole story. The sixth team had a trade to discuss at the neutral zone between Sector X and Sector R. Diaz was bored, and he learned that there was an underground trade of rare power ores on a certain planet in Sector X. That was why he ran over and stole it while the parties were in the middle of a fight. At the same time, he released fake news on another planet saying that he had obtained a huge gemstone worth several $100 million to attract the robbers. That was how the series of events happened. This way, Diaz was able to obtain money from the government and the passenger transport company of Planet X, C-100 because he assisted in fighting the robbers. Although Diaz's explanation was simple, Sillin knew that there were many details that were difficult to grasp. This also proved Diaz's strength and ability to control the situation. He truly deserved to be the vice captain of the 6th Division. Diaz led Sillin along the passageway while explaining the situation on the ship to him. That's the warehouse, the place to store our backups. Turn right up ahead is. Hey, Miantuan, why are you sleeping here? Diaz shouted at a certain spot on the wall of the passageway. At first glance, it really didn't look like there was anything there. However, if one were to look closely enough or if their senses were sensitive enough, they would discover that there was actually a life form there. However, it seemed to have blended into its surroundings, and it was impossible to tell from its color. Diaz walked over and pulled the thing down. It was about 30 centimeters long, and when it was separated from the wall, the color on its body receded, and its body immediately turned transparent. However, its two small eyes were more obvious. They looked around, and when it saw Diaz, it smacked its lips as if greeting him. A chameleon? Sillin looked curiously at the little fellow in Diaz's hand. Don't try to act innocent. What bad things did you do? Why did Yudi throw you out again? Diaz flicked the head of the chameleon called Miantuan. The Miantuan curled its tail and wagged it, pretending to be pitiful. Diaz snorted. He really did knead the little chameleon into a ball like he was kneading the Miantuan. Bam! He threw it to the other side of the passageway and stuck it to the wall. The little chameleon quickly adjusted its color to its surroundings, and it seemed to be one with its surroundings. That fellow is called Miantuan, a mutated chameleon. Yudi picked it up during a mission 5 years ago. This little fellow has done a lot of bad things. Diaz didn't explain much about the team member called Yudi. Diaz brought Sillin to the main control room and introduced the other team members to Sillin. After allowing Sillin to communicate with the other team members, Diaz called Beaver over. Beaver, come with me. Yes, Deputy Captain. Sillin had seen the team member called Beaver before. He was the person who appeared on the starship's screen. What surprised Sillin was that the people on the starship were all very young. Many of them were about the same age as Diaz, and some were even younger. However, they weren't as young as Sillin. With Carrie as an example, the people on the starship treated Sillin quite well. Although they weren't sincere, they weren't cold or distant either. After Diaz called Beaver out, he went to Beaver's workshop. He turned the silver ring on his hand, and a port popped out to connect to an instrument. Analyze this video. The video on the screen was taken when Diaz was fighting with the robbers in the control room of the starship. With infrared processing, the darkness at that time wasn't a big deal. However, as Diaz fought with the robbers, the video was a little dazzling. Beaver did not say much. His 10 fingers flew as he operated the program on the instrument. The footage on the screen began to be cut off and reassembled in 3 dimensions. After a series of adjustments such as bitrate and other tasks, it soon became a clear and smooth video that did not dazzle the eyes. Analyze that kid Silen. At this moment, Dias wasn't as casual and frivolous as he usually was. He was even a little serious. Beaver adjusted the image on the screen and showed Silen's every move in slow motion. The more Beaver watched, the more shocked he became. Deputy Captain, are you sure that guy is a human and not some other race that looks like a human? In the video, Silen seemed to be able to predict the robber's next move every time, and he easily dodged the muzzle of the gun. It should be known that all the light sources in the control room were cut off. I'm sure he didn't wear any supplementary lenses, and he's definitely a human, Dias said in a low voice while staring at the screen. Beaver's brows were almost knitted into knots. Deputy Captain, there's one more thing. When you guys were teleporting over, I ran a genetic level analysis on Silen. Logically, if it's just a B-rank genotype, the reliability of the results calculated by the multi-factor analysis should be above 95%. However, the result of the calculation is only 90%. What's the reason for the missing 5% uncertainty? After a pause, Beaver probed, how about we take that kid's genes? Bodily fluids, hair, or even fingerprints? No need. We should give our future companions the respect they deserve. Alright, but that kid is really amazing. Of course. Don't you know what kind of eyes your deputy captain has? Oh right, Beaver, don't you think Silen looks familiar? Dias began to struggle with this question again. Beaver thought for a moment, but he really couldn't remember where he had seen him before. The galaxy is so big, and there are so many people who look alike. Do we need to enter the computer database and compare them? Forget it, not for now. Entering the database required the B Squadron captain's unlock code. It was too troublesome. Dias sighed and gave up on the thought. Oh right, Deputy Captain, the captain has been urging us to meet up with them as soon as possible. The deal doesn't seem to be going well. Got it. Get ready to go. Dias waved his hand and walked out the door. Chapter 10. Silen didn't give an immediate reply to Dias' invitation to join the team, but Dias wasn't in a hurry either. Both parties needed a period of time to get to know each other, and it would be beneficial for them to get used to each other in the future. Carrie pestered Silen every day about the benefits of joining the team. Carrie was not stingy with his enthusiasm towards capable people. Moreover, Carrie was a battle maniac, so he often dragged Silen to the training room to spar. Since it was a spar, neither party would use the methods they used to kill. Even so, Carrie was still having a good time. Silen's fist technique was something he had never seen before. It was flexible and had a strange aura to it. Hard and soft, harmonious and murderous, it all depended on Silen's thoughts. Even though Silen was a rank B genotype, Carrie would not purposely give in, because Silen had the ability to fight against an rank A genotype. Silen also gained a lot from sparring with Carrie. Coming into contact with different battle styles was very beneficial to one's own improvement. During sparring, Carrie gave Silen a lot of battle experience and examples. After all, Carrie's hunter experience was much more than Silen's. In a fleet that was traveling between sectors, the combatants must know how to fight. Even if they were not good at piloting, they must learn the most basic controls. The cost of a good fighter was too high, so Dias would not let Carrie fly it out for fun. Since they could not fly a fighter, Carrie dragged Silen to the fighter combat platform on the computer. Although it was not as satisfying as a real fighter, the simulation was not bad, and they could fight a few rounds. At first, Silen was not familiar with it. He had played hoverboards and flying cars on planet Brown Earth, but he had never come into contact with a fighter. At first, Carrie won a few rounds, but in less than 5 rounds, Carrie began to lose. Moreover, he lost faster and more miserably. Every time this happened, Carrie would request for a different type of mech, and then they would start again. The cycle of winning and losing continued. In the end, even with a different type of fighter, Carrie was still utterly defeated. That guy is not human. After a defeat, Carrie logged out of the online battle platform and shouted while grabbing his messy hair. "Do you need me to comfort you?" A voice rang out. It sounded like someone had just woken up. Sillin looked over and saw a tall and thin young man about the same age as Carrie. He was wearing pajamas with a strawberry pattern on them and snow-white fluffy slippers. He was looking at them curiously. Was he still a child? It was hard to imagine that there would be people dressed like this on the ship. When Carrie heard this voice, he looked like he was constipated. He remained silent, but the twitching of his facial muscles made it clear that he was feeling depressed at the moment, because the owner of the voice definitely wouldn't say anything good in this situation. Did this guy recover from his sleep so quickly? Why did he come here for no reason? "Hey, Yudi, you're awake." Beaver walked in from outside and said to Yudi, who was standing at the door. He turned to look at Sillin and laughed gloatingly at Carrie's misfortune. "Sillin, you won again. You're improving quite fast. The lieutenant is looking for you. He wants you to go to the control room." Sillin nodded at Yudi and left with Beaver, leaving Yudi and Carrie staring at each other. "So he's the Sillin the lieutenant mentioned." Yudi looked at Carrie. Based on his reflexes and body coordination, as well as his control of the fighter, combined with some information I've heard before, I came to a conclusion. Carrie covered his ears. I'm not listening. He went easy on me in the match just now." Carrie had an urge to strangle this bastard Yudi. Was this comfort? Yudi scratched his head, yawned, and walked out of the door. Before he left, he did not forget to say something that almost made Carrie vomit blood. "You're so lousy. Yudi, I'll fight you." Banging sounds came from the combat room. The Miantuan stopped in his tracks to the combat room, turned around, and ran. There were two dangerous people there. When these two fought, it was easy to get caught in the crossfire. Recently, Sillin's sleeping time had gradually increased. Other than being dragged to the combat platform by Carrie for a few rounds, he spent the rest of his time eating and sleeping. Originally, Diaz and the others thought that it was normal to rest because mental work was very energy-consuming. Just like Yudi, he would sleep for a while after doing a lot of calculations. However, this explanation was quickly rejected. It was because Sillin was just too much of a sleeper. Even if he wasn't fighting Carrie, he would still take a good nap. Moreover, the amount of time he slept was growing longer and longer. The amount of brain energy he used was completely disproportionate to the amount of time he slept. Diaz had the ship's doctor examine Sillin, and the results showed that Sillin was very healthy. As for Sillin's sleeping time, he could not explain it. Sillin also said that it was because of his own constitution. Diaz was so worried about Sillin's sleeping phenomenon that he had dark circles under his eyes. At first, he wanted to recommend Sillin to join the fleet when he met up with the other members of the 6th Squad, but the other lieutenant commanders already had some opinions about Diaz. If it wasn't because the 6th Squad's commander, Schotten, was Diaz's older brother, it would be difficult for Diaz to keep his position as a lieutenant commander. If Sillin's habit of sleeping was added to the mix, it might not be easy for them to accept Sillin as a main force member. The competition between the 10B squadrons of Vanguard was growing fiercer and fiercer. In order to surpass the other 3 hunter regiments, the A squadron had begun to take a series of measures. Schotten did not explain the specifics, but Diaz knew that the 6th Squad urgently needed to develop faster and achieve results. Right now, they were in desperate need of talent, and that was why Diaz was so eager to keep Sillin. "Sillin, you're a hunter too, aren't you?" Although it was a question, Diaz said it with certainty. Sillin knew that Diaz must have investigated him, but as long as Genya and that strange chip were not exposed, Sillin did not care. Moreover, Sillin believed that they would only find out about Sillin's fake ID and memory card. As for what happened before, it would be mostly speculation. No one would think that Sillin could adjust his appearance from his origin genes. "Yes, but I'm just a shadow hunter, passing my days on a small planet. Compared to a hunter regiment, wandering hunters were not worth mentioning, but Silen did not feel inferior or run away from his past. Dias sighed, I don't care what you were like in the past. As long as you have a good character and strength, I welcome you. You should be familiar with our style after being on the ship for so many days. Compared to the other 3 hunter regiments, we, Vanguard, have much more freedom. This is also why our commander named our starship Freedom Ship. Seeing that Silen was silent, Dias continued, the universe is vast, and this endless space is every hunter's dream. However, this dream required a certain amount of foundation, or it would not be able to bear the burden. Wandering hunters had no way of touching this boundless space at all. Only by joining a hunter regiment would they be able to go further, and walk higher. After all, a person's ability was limited. Silen knew what Dias did not finish. Moreover, joining a hunter regiment would be good for finding the Gen family that Genya had mentioned. After spending so much time together, Silen was quite satisfied with the atmosphere of the 6th team. Exploring this seemingly reachable yet unfathomable space was something he really wanted to look forward to. What do I need to do? Silen looked at Dias. This sentence had already expressed Silen's decision, and it made Dias feel much better. As long as Silen made up his mind to join the team, Dias would do his best to deal with those troublesome deputy captains. I'm relieved to hear that. You don't have to worry too much, I'm here. After all, I'm the deputy captain. Dias did not care about Silen's sleeping constitution anymore, and focused on thinking about how to deal with the situation after meeting up with the other members of the 6th team. Chapter 11. Seeing that Dias had finished his conversation with Silen, Yudi rang the bell and came in. Captain, lend me Silen. Dias waved his hand. Go. Get along well with your teammates. After the 2 left, they were nowhere to be seen even when it was time to meet up with the main team. Where's Silen? Dias asked. I haven't seen him. He's still with Yudi, I guess. Carrie was a little short of breath. He had tried several times to rally his morale and wanted to find Silen to fight again in the combat room. However, he heard that Silen had been called over by that bastard Yudi to research a formula. Carrie knew better than to disturb him. Yesterday, when I was delivering food to them, I heard them discussing whether a certain formula was square or square root. Today, when I delivered food to them, they were discussing weighted multidimensional matrices. All in all, they haven't slept during this period. I'm afraid that the formula Yudi was researching is about to come out. Beaver spread his hands helplessly. It's rare that Yudi found someone of his own kind. The group fell silent. 2 weirdos. Of course, such talents were also what the 6th team urgently needed. If Yudi's formula was successful, the program he wrote next would be a breakthrough for the 6th team. The efficiency and success rate of the automatic Sentinel on the starship would be greatly increased. However, what troubled Dias was that it was so mentally exhausting. Didn't that mean that the 2 of them would need to sleep for a period of time? Unlike the starship Silen was riding on right now, the 6th squad's main starship was much bigger, and there were more than a dozen similar starships surrounding the main starship. After docking with the main starship, Dias went to see his brother, the captain of the 6th Division, Schotten. Today, Dias surprisingly did not wear his flashy sunglasses. Instead, he looked much more mature. After receiving the call for a meeting, Dias walked into the meeting room. Dias sat down on the seat that belonged to him and looked affectionately at the famous cold beauty Asha, who was also sitting in the same seat. However, she still ignored Dias's passionate gaze. The other 4 vice-captains were already used to it. A few days ago, Schotten and the other 5 lieutenant commanders excluding Dias had gone to negotiate a deal with Aflon of the Duance family, a great galactic family. However, the outcome was not as good as they had imagined, and the stalemate had not turned for the better even now. It was indeed difficult to fish out more benefits from Aflon's hands. Moreover, the B squadrons of the Navigator Hunter Corps, one of the 4 great hunter regiments, had a batch of goods that was not inferior to the 6 squads. The reason why the sixth team had spent so much manpower and resources to obtain that batch of power ores was to obtain more benefits. The sixth team would not be satisfied if they could not sell it for a good price. The previous 2 face-to-face negotiations were not successful. Judging from Aflan's attitude, it seemed that he was going to make a deal with the navigator. Schotten and the other vice-captains had been very depressed for a few days in a row. It could be seen from the low pressure around them. Today was the last negotiation, and Aflan's intentions could be seen from the fact that he had adopted a video negotiation mode instead of a face-to-face one. The sixth team's situation was not optimistic. If they could not make it this time, then the sixth team would have to find the next buyer. However, this batch of goods was not something that just anyone could buy. Even if they could, with Aflan's precedent, the buyer would not be able to offer a high price in the end. Dias, Schotten, who was sitting at the head of the table, passed over a tablet. You weren't present during the last 2 negotiations. This is the basic situation of the last 2 negotiations. Take a look. Dias straightened his expression and took the tablet. He frowned as he read on. Dias knew very well that the sixth team had almost lost a vice-captain, and many of their spaceplanes and probe equipment had been scrapped in order to obtain that batch of goods. They had also raised the price of this batch of goods to a higher level, but Aflan had lowered the price a little too much, hadn't he? The more he read, the more irritated Dias became. He picked up the cup of water in front of him and poured it into his mouth fiercely. Suddenly, an image flashed across the tablet. Dias sprayed a mouthful of water on the person in front of him. The conference table was also covered in water stains. Asha was glad that he was not sitting opposite Dias. Meanwhile, the person in front of Dias who had been sprayed all over had a face that was already dark and gloomy to begin with. This was because everyone had been thinking about the transaction this time, and their minds were completely focused on it. Who would have thought that Dias would suddenly do something like this? Moreover, he was so close that the vice-captain in front of him could not react in time and was hit directly. Under Schotten and the vice-captain's condemning gazes, Dias hurriedly explained. Ahem. Sorry, I was too excited and couldn't hold it in for a moment. Dias rewound the image on the tablet and pointed at the person who had appeared on it, asking, is this really Aflan Duance? The last time Dias saw Aflan was 10 years ago. At that time, he was just an ordinary member of the sixth team, and Schotten was just a vice-captain. Right now, Dias could only sigh emotionally. No wonder, seeing Schotten's dissatisfied gaze, Dias hurriedly took out another tablet that he carried with him and handed it over. Take a look at this guy. Holding the 2 tablets, Schotten was also a little stunned for a moment. Alike, they really are alike. The vice-captains also moved closer to take a look, and their expressions became odd after they saw it. Alike, right? Dias wiped the water from the corner of his mouth. I felt that the kid looked familiar the first time I saw him, but I just couldn't remember who he was until now. This guy is the new member I'm going to recommend, Silen. If it wasn't for the fact that Aflan's information showed no children, I really would have thought that these 2 are father and son. Right now, Schotten was no longer pursuing Dias's behavior just now. His fingers were tapping the table rhythmically, his thoughts unknown. Looking at the time, there was still 10 minutes before the video conference would begin. Dias, call Silen over. Remember, try not to let the people on the ship see his face. All right. Dias did not ask any questions and swiftly left the conference room. Not long after, he brought over Silen, whose eyes were half closed and looked like he was still half asleep. Seeing these people in the conference room, Silen cleared his sleepiness. He could feel that these people were not simple. Sit, no need to be too reserved. Schotten pointed at a chair at the side and smiled kindly. Silen looked suspiciously at the 7 people before sitting down. I'm not being reserved, but your gazes are a little creepy, Silen, right? Dias has already told me about your situation, and we've also discussed it. We welcome you to the 6th Division of the Vanguard Hunters. I'll send you your identity card later. Dias lowered his head and drank some water. When did you guys discuss this? The other vice-captains did not object to Shotten's words. Although they had opinions about Dias, Silen's situation was special. It was rare for the vice-captains to unanimously approve of Silen's status as a member, and a member of the main force no less. Silen looked suspiciously at Dias, whose head was lowered. Didn't they say that it would be difficult to get a member of the main force? Didn't they say that the vice-captains would make things difficult for him? Then what was the situation now? Chapter 12. Shotten did not say much and passed over Aflon's image displayed on the tablet. Silen was stunned on the spot after seeing it. If it wasn't for the fact that he knew very well that his current appearance was formed from altered gene expression, Silen would have suspected that the person on the screen was his own father. Coincidence? What a coincidence! After briefly explaining the situation of Aflon and the deal to Silen, Shotten pointed at a chair at the corner of the meeting room. Silen, you'll sit here during the discussion later. All right. Silen had guessed a few things. The fact that he was allowed to join the 6th team and become a main force so easily meant that he was pretty useful. At the very least, his face was very important to the 6th team. The video conference began a while later. On the screen, the 37-year-old Aflon wore an amiable smile on his face, but his every move revealed a kind of charisma that was not out of place. Originally, he was prepared to end the battle quickly and reject the 6th team's deal and choose the navigator's side. But when he saw Silen sitting at the corner, he did not say his original words. Aflon and Shotten were both smart people. They could roughly understand each other's thoughts with just a glance. In that instant, Aflon thought of many things. After a short pause, Aflon laughed softly. Let me think about the deal some more. But I think we should have a good talk. Don't you think so, Captain Shotten? Of course. My pleasure. Waving his hand to signal the others to leave, Shotten was the only one left in the meeting room. After being dragged out of the meeting room by Dias, Silen lay down on a chair in the lounge and closed his eyes, suppressing the surprise in his heart. He had guessed a few possible scenarios that could happen next, but no matter which one it was, Silen was looking forward to it very much. This was his first mission after leaving planet Brown Earth. Right now, Shotten was in a very good mood. Very good. Strength was not the only reason he could become the 6th Division's captain. Shotten saw things further than anyone else. The reason he let Aflon see Silen was to confirm his guess. 2 hours later, Shotten called Silen over for a secret talk. Pretend to be his son. Silen looked at the mission plan that Shotten had sorted out. Yes. Although Aflon didn't explain the reason, I'm guessing that this will play a very important role in Aflon's fight for the position of successor of the Duance family. What do you think? Tell me what you think. Silen swiftly skimmed through Aflon's mind and said, although the outside world says that Aflon doesn't have any children, I think he does. However, for the sake of his descendants' safety, he would not allow his descendants to be exposed before he obtained the position of successor. That would be too dangerous. His goal was to make me cover for his true descendant and attract the firepower of certain people with ulterior motives. This way, Aflon would be able to free up more energy to fight for the position of successor. Of course, this is just my guess. Very good. To be able to think of this from these one-sided materials, you are very good. However, this is only a part of the mission that Aflon proposed. There is another part that he can only confirm after he meets you. What I want to ask now is, Silen, do you want to accept this mission? Why wouldn't I? This mission has a certain degree of danger. The members of the Freedom Ship have their own right to choose. We are not an army, we do not need to obey our superiors' orders unconditionally. You can refuse. Why should I refuse? Silen looked at the amount of money on the plan and was very satisfied. Normally speaking, the danger of a mission was directly proportional to the amount of money earned. Shotten looked Silen up and down. I didn't realize that you were quite a money grubber. This is the nature of hunters, isn't it? Hunters were not adventurers. Hunters were the kind of people who ran on the edge of life and death for the sake of money and profit. You're right, this is what a hunter is. Shotten chuckled, you and I will meet Aflon in 2 days. As for the price, we can still fight for more. Let's use these 2 days to prepare. There were some things that Shotten did not say, but Scylla knew that if Scylla accepted this mission regardless of the danger of this mission, then the deal that the 6th team and Aflon had discussed would most likely be completed. Moreover, through this matter, Scylla would even receive the recognition of the few vice-captains of the 6th team. This would be very beneficial to Scylla's future development in the 6th team. The competition between the 4 great hunter regiments was growing more and more intense. Although there were no large-scale frontal conflicts, there were surging undercurrents. Therefore, the A Squadron of Vanguard had already begun to take measures, and the results of every B Squadron had an important impact on the members of the B Squadron. If they could use Aflon to influence the communication between the 6th team and the Duance family, then it would undoubtedly be a great boost to the development of the 6th team. The importance of the great families of the galaxy to hunter regiments could not be ignored. The main reason these families were able to stand tall in the dust of history was because of their channels and network of relationships. The relationship between the military and hunter regiments was very subtle. Although they were not absolute opposites, their relationship was not harmonious. If it was possible, the military would never allow the existence of hunter regiments, but reality was much more complicated. Therefore, even if they could not suppress them openly, there were many times when the military would obstruct the missions and development of hunter regiments in the dark. There were not many people in the galaxy who dared to provoke the main fleet of the 4 great hunter regiments, but the B squadrons were different. The military, the political organizations of the various sectors, and those small hunter regiments would scratch the B squadrons if they had the chance, because the existence of the B squadrons was to steal their money and reputation. Of course, the development of the B squadrons would be much easier with the mediation of the great families of the galaxy. Therefore, there was no way the 6th squad would be willing to give up the opportunity that was Aflon after much difficulty. Moreover, they were competing against another hunter regiment's B squadron, so they had to fight for it with all their might. Furthermore, if Aflon could successfully ascend to the position with Scylla's help, then the benefits that the 6th squad would enjoy in the future would be limitless. This was something everyone was well aware of. Therefore, the few important personages of the 6th squad who were in the know could be said to have high hopes for Scylla. As for Shotten telling Scylla to get ready, he was telling Scylla to use these 2 days of free time to learn the information he needed for his mission. In terms of experience, Scylla was definitely no match for those veteran hunters. Moreover, due to his background, Scylla's understanding of the latest information was very one-sided. For a hunter who ran through the stars, this was a very huge disadvantage. Because of this, Shotten had purposely chosen some information for Scylla to read. After arranging a single room for Scylla, Shotten convened another meeting with the 6 lieutenant commanders to deal with Scylla's confidential work. However, when Shotten had finished the meeting and brought Scylla some food, he discovered that the person who should have seized the time to learn the relevant information was snoring away with his head tilted to one side. He was sound asleep. The electronic notebook that recorded the information had been tossed to the side. The screens of the few computers around him were flashing rapidly, and it was impossible to see what they were playing. Beside him, Diaz opened his mouth, but he swallowed the words he was about to say in the end. He carefully glanced at Shotten beside him, whose expression had changed, and screamed in his heart, "Scylla, you better work hard. How can you fall asleep at such a critical moment?" Taking a deep breath, Shotten put down the plate of food in his hand, turned around, and walked out. Diaz followed behind Shotten with a bitter face. For the next 2 days, Scylla slept so much that he didn't even eat anything. During this period of time, everyone in the 6th squad realized that the atmosphere was freezing them to death. From the squad leader Shotten to the 6 lieutenant commanders, every single one of them was surrounded by an aura that said, "Danger, do not approach." If it were not for Shotten, the lieutenant commanders would have probably knocked Scylla awake and forced him to read the information. A hunter who did not know the information was not a good hunter. "Say, how can that kid sleep so peacefully?" Shotten lay on the chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. Sitting opposite him, Diaz scratched the curly hair on his head. Ahem, how should I put it? Although this kid's performance makes me want to beat him up, but... Diaz pondered over the words, I always feel that the kid is fearless. Chapter 13. Shotten raised an eyebrow and looked at Diaz, fearless? Why? A young hunter who was born in the 13 backward sectors, a rank B genotype who had left his planet for the first time, what gave him such confidence? And what did he rely on? However, Shotten believed in Diaz. In terms of leadership ability, Diaz wasn't outstanding compared to the other lieutenant commanders. But in terms of ability to pick people, no one in the entire 6th Division could surpass Diaz. Even the lieutenant commanders who disliked Diaz had to admit that although Diaz looked frivolous normally, he had an extraordinary intuition. Important talents such as Beaver, Carry, and Yudi were all discovered by Diaz. From ordinary people who were almost drowned in a sea of people to slowly displaying dazzling talent, the people Diaz had picked out proved that Diaz's intuition was correct. If it wasn't for the large-scale mutiny of a few hunter regiments a few years ago, Diaz wouldn't have been forced to investigate Silen's identity so much this time. That kid isn't a simple person. He won't play dumb. I hope it's as you say. Shotten sighed. He was also under a lot of pressure. After all, this matter was very important to the 6th team. The other 5 lieutenant commanders had already expressed their dissatisfaction. If Silen couldn't give a good performance when the time came, then Diaz might be dragged into it. After all, Diaz had guaranteed that Silen would become a main force member and accept missions. Otherwise, the lieutenant commanders wouldn't have agreed so easily just because Silen looked like a flan. On the day of the appointment, Silen woke up on time like an alarm. Shotten didn't have the time to ask him too many questions, and after receiving Silen's "I feel alright" reply, he took the few people on the spaceship and headed towards a planet in Sector R that Aflon had designated. Although they were both part of the 13 backward sectors, Sector R's development was slightly better than Sector X. After the spaceship landed at the port, Shotten only brought Silen with him while the others waited on the spaceship. Many businessmen like to use the 13 backward sectors as a raw material processing site for their products because they could obtain a large amount of cheap labor there. Walking on the streets, Silen saw the familiar scenes that were commonly seen on planet Brown Earth. Different species of creatures rushed back and forth. At the counter of a shop, a 2-headed dollar was eagerly introducing the items in the shop to the customers. They could handle 2 customers at the same time, they were cute and cheap. It was important to note that some terms with the word human referred to primates that were similar to ordinary humans and had a high degree of evolution. Of course, some species were not worse than ordinary humans, but they were rare due to their small numbers. Shotten brought Silen into a hotel with more than 100 floors. After reporting the floor they had booked, the waiter respectfully led the 2 of them up. This was because the floors above 100 floors were not things that ordinary people could book in advance. Moreover, Aflon had booked 5 floors in one go, so his wealth alone was enough to show that his identity was extraordinary. Aflon's men brought the 2 of them to the middle floor of the 5 floors. The 2 floors above and below were all guarded by Aflon's subordinates. From this, one could see Aflon's cautious attitude towards this matter. Silen had come here wearing a mask and makeup to disguise himself. After Aflon and Shotten gave him a signal, Silen took off the mask on his face. Aflon observed him carefully for a moment and examined him with a device before nodding in satisfaction. You must believe us, Mr. Aflon. We would never lie to our customers for profit. Everyone knows Vanguard's reputation. Shotten leaned back in his chair and said. Aflon did not comment, but his genes are only rank B. As far as I know, there are a lot of rank B descendants in the Duance family. Shotten knew that there were a lot of rank B descendants in some large families, forces, and even military politicians. It was just that they could improve and evolve to rank A later on. The manpower, material, and financial resources required for this process was not something that an ordinary person could afford. Aflon frowned. Rank B is too risky. I don't like extra trouble. Shotten looked at Sillin, his eyes asking for Sillin's opinion. Sillin was not annoyed either. He asked politely with a smile, Mr. Aflon, may I ask if the two bodyguards behind you are rank A genotypes? That's right. Sillin's figure moved as soon as Aflon's voice fell. Even his afterimage was blurry. Bang! One of the bodyguards behind Aflon was sent flying and smashed straight into the wall. Even the entire special wall caved inwards in an arc. The other bodyguard held a gun in his hand, and the muzzle was pressed against Sillin's head. As expected of a rank A. One had to admit that this bodyguard's movements were very fast. If it wasn't for the fact that Sillin was still useful in this transaction, he would have opened fire without hesitation. However, sweat was dripping down the forehead of this gun-wielding bodyguard, and his shrunken pupils revealed his current mood. The people who were about to charge in after hearing the noise were waved away by Aflon's butler. This old butler who was usually unflinching even in the face of a collapsing mountain could not be said to be not shocked. While Aflon was sighing that Vanguard was indeed full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons, Shotten, the 6th team's captain, was even more panic-stricken. Only the heavens knew how much effort Shotten had spent to maintain his composure on the surface. Holy shit, what kind of monster is this kid? Both sides appeared to be tied in this round, but it was not. Aflon, the old butler, and Shotten could all see it clearly. For this bodyguard who was pointing a gun at Sillin, he would have fired first if he could, and not check if there were any changes to the gun. It was exactly because of this that he managed to keep his life. A person who could stay by Aflon's side as a bodyguard must have some skill. It was only after that moment had passed that he noticed that the gun in his hand had changed. A thin black needle was quietly inserted into the muzzle where the high-pressure pump and the firing groove of that gun were located. If he had fired just now, then the laser gun would have most likely shot at the bodyguard himself instead of Sillin due to the feedback effect caused by this needle. It was extremely rare for a high-energy firing gun to have such a small model. It looked no different from a gun with metal bullets, but it was a solid laser gun. But it was exactly because of this that Sillin had such an opportunity. Shotten rubbed his chin. Aflon had equipped his bodyguards with a new type of gun. If one didn't have a certain level of understanding towards this gun model, and if one's own body strength and reflexes had reached a certain level, it would have been absolutely impossible. 2 days ago, Shotten had only briefly mentioned this gun model in the electronic notebook he had given to Sillin, but did not go into detail. When he recalled that there were still a few flashing computer screens in the room at that time, Shotten had the urge to facepalm. Dias, where did you find this freak? It was true that Sillin had looked up this gun model on the computer to gain a deeper understanding of it after he had seen it. The entire process of gathering information about the gun model took no more than 2 minutes. All he had to do after that was to digest the information in sleep. The reason why Sillin had been sleeping for a longer period of time recently was because he had entered that special state. In that state, Sillin's mental focus and comprehension ability would reach a peak, allowing him to digest the information he had gathered in the shortest amount of time possible. It was just that this state was no different from sleeping in the eyes of an outsider. Sillin ignored the bodyguard and walked next to Shotten. He looked at Aflon and seemed to be asking Aflon what he thought. The smile on Aflon's face widened a little. Very good. The bodyguard who had been holding the gun withdrew it and stood behind Aflon once more. Meanwhile, the other bodyguard who had been slammed into the wall, pulled himself out and stretched his body, letting out cracking sounds as he restored the displaced bones in his body. He was a rank A genotype after all. Although the blow just now was very fierce, it did not cause him too much damage. However, the way the person looked at Sillin was strange, as if he was looking at a monster. Mr. Aflon, do you still remember the suggestion I made? Shotten straightened his face. In order to give his team members greater benefits, the 6th team's captain would grab onto any opportunity with all his might. Of course. Aflon motioned for the butler standing at the side to bring the document over. 7 Lights University. Sillin was a little surprised when he saw the document. Seven Lights University, its full name was the Galactic Federation's Seven Lights University of Higher Education. It was one of the top institutions of higher education and was located at Sector B. It was not a place just anyone could go. Chapter 14. Aren't you very happy, Sillin? Seeing Sillin's puzzled gaze, Shotten explained, Mr. Aflon only asked you to pretend to be his son. He didn't ask you to be his bodyguard, so it's impossible for you to come into contact with his family's business. Therefore, in order to make the most of your time, I suggested to Mr. Aflon that you receive higher education, and Mr. Aflon chose Seven Lights University. The galaxy's education was roughly divided into three major categories: elementary education, intermediate education, and higher education. In the four great hunter regiments, many hunters had received higher education, and as long as their age met the requirements, the regiment would fund and nurture them. The four great hunter regiments were never stingy when it came to talents, and this was why they were superior to other hunter regiments. However, most hunters received their higher education at the DM sector, and there really weren't many like Sillin who could receive higher education at the three radiant sectors. This was also an investment Shotten made for the development of the sixth team, and the sixth team didn't even have to pay for it. It was practically a perfect opportunity. Moreover, Shotten was certain that even if Sillin was only pretending to be Aflon's son, the school Aflon chose would definitely not be low for the sake of the Duance family's reputation. Sillin wasn't an idiot. Back at Planet Brown Earth in Sector X, Sillin hadn't even received a proper elementary education. All this time, he had only been taught by Genya himself. Why would he let go of such an opportunity? Of course I'm willing to have this opportunity. Aflon nodded. Everyone knows how Seven Lights University is. The reason I chose Seven Lights University isn't just because of the Duance family's reputation, but also because it's located at Sector B. The influence of the great families is limited there, and some people will have more scruples even if they want to attack you. It's good for both me and you. It was true that Aflon didn't need to waste more manpower to deal with certain possible emergencies if he was at Seven Lights University. Aflon received the other documents the butler had prepared and passed them over. Sign it if there are no problems. According to our agreement, the down payment will be 100,000, and according to the galactic time, 50,000 will be transferred to Sillin's account every 10 days from now on. The other 10 million will be paid when the mission is complete. Galactic credits? Shotten asked. Galaxy dollars. Aflon seemed to be very dissatisfied with Shotten's questioning. Would the great Duance family really take out sector coins? The exchange rate of galactic currency to the sector currency of the 13 backward sectors was 100, and the exchange rate to the sector currency of the 10 DM trade sectors was 10. Sillin's previous hunting bounties were all in sector credits, and the few million he used to buy a blank ID and a debit card were all sector credits that were lagging behind the 13th sector. 3 years' worth of hunting bounties was only equivalent to 10 days' worth of profit from this mission. Noticing the dissatisfaction in Aflon's tone, Shotten smiled and cracked a rare joke. Sillin is very outstanding. Where else would we find such a good hunter if we miss him? Not to mention that he can also be a bodyguard after pretending to be a son. Of course, the fee will be extra. Sillin rolled his eyes. At this moment, he could see that Shotten and Dias were indeed brothers. The way they joked around was practically the same. Then, our batch of goods. Shotten said. We'll buy them according to the price you mentioned. Aflon was also very decisive. Happy working with you. Happy working with you. Both sides were very straightforward and smart people. There was no need for additional explanations. After the discussion, all three of them had completed all the necessary agreements. In order to compete for Sillin's mission this time, the three of them had signed a tripartite agreement. Other than the three of them, no one else knew the contents of the agreement. Because Aflon wouldn't be staying in the 13 backward sectors for long, he gave Sillin an address and told Sillin to go there 2 days later. Someone would meet him there. Shotten left the hotel in a relaxed mood and told Sillin to return to the team first. After all, it was inconvenient for him to walk around with a mask on his face. Because everything had been settled, many days of gloominess had been swept away completely. After Shotten had the 6th squad deliver the goods to Aflan's men, the 6th squad captain looked at the amount of money he had saved into Carrie's account and went on a rare shopping spree, improving the quality of life of the 6th squad. After returning to the fleet, Shotten had even pinched Sillin's arm on purpose. This is really meat. It was just that every time he recalled how Sillin had slammed that A-rank bodyguard into the wall, Shotten couldn't help but shudder. How in the world did he look like a B-rank person? He was practically a human-shaped armored car. On the other hand, after Sillin and Shotten had left the hotel, Aflan sat quietly on his chair with his eyes lowered and his fingers crossed on his knees. He looked like he was deep in thought. A long while later, Aflan raised his eyes and said, "Sappho, return the slaughter elf, to upgrade and improve it. Discard it if you can't solve that problem. Hurry up the matters at 7 lights, it's almost time. Also, start making arrangements for Sillin." Got it. Aflan's words were simple, but as an old butler, Sappho understood Aflan's meaning clearly. Slaughter Elf was the gun model used by Aflan's bodyguards. It was also a new type of gun developed by the Duance family. Because the gun was small and easy to hide, its structure was simplified a lot. But it was also because of this that the scene where Sillin stabbed its Achilles heel with a single needle had appeared. If he couldn't improve on this point, then Aflan would rather give up on this gun model than take the risk. The second matter was 7 Lights. 7 Lights University's recruitment had ended a long time ago, but the semester had not started yet. Therefore, they needed to go through the relevant procedures, and with the Duance family's influence, it wasn't hard for them to do so. The last matter was regarding his son, Sillin. In just a few days, the outside world would learn of this son that Aflan had left behind, and some operations were about to begin. After returning to the fleet, Sillin went to find Beaver. As a technician, Beaver had the right to use some of the 6th team's instruments. Protective bone crystal. Beaver glanced at the pendant Sillin took out. It's possible, but you should know that the energy consumption of protective bone crystal is quite high. How much? Sillin asked. Beaver thought for a moment and calculated the cost, at least 30,000, and its GAL credits. No problem. Aflan's 100,000 GAL credits were enough. Beaver's eyes widened. This kid had only been here for a few days, and he was already this rich? However, Beaver did not ask too many questions. Diaz had told him not to ask too much about Sillin during this period of time. Follow me. Bone crystal was a blocky crystal formed from the ashes of a person who had been electrocuted, compressed under high pressure, and processed. It cost almost 10,000 GAL credits to crystallize the bone crystal. Back then, most of Sillin's hunting bounty had been spent on this. An hour later, Beaver returned the protected bone crystal to Sillin. The protected bone crystal had shrunk a little, but it was also sturdier and more translucent than before. Pointing it at a light source, one could see the silhouette of a person inside. An old girlfriend? Beaver asked. The person depicted inside the bone crystal bore no resemblance to Sillin's appearance at all. This meant that they were not relatives. Sillin hung the bone crystal back on his neck. Beaver patted Sillin's shoulder. He had seen Sillin's situation many times before. There's still a long way to go. Perhaps one day in the near future, Sillin would meet a good girl and lessen the sorrow of the past. During the 2 days since Sillin had returned to the ship, no one had seen Sillin except for Beaver, Shotten, and a few vice-captains. The 6th team had done a good job in keeping secrets. Shotten had told Sillin everything that needed to be explained. The following opportunities could only be grasped by Sillin himself. 2 days later, Sillin put on his mask and went to the place Aflan mentioned to accept his new identity. Chapter 15. A certain planet in Sector D. Scylla arrived at this planet according to the information Aflon left behind. After walking off the passenger ship, Scylla pulled his thick coat and straightened his collar. It was no wonder Aflon had chosen Scylla to come to this planet. It was currently winter on this planet, and Scylla did not need to disguise himself at all. He pulled his collar up and covered most of his face. The wind was strong, and pedestrians came and went in a hurry. Even those who knew Aflon's face would not pay close attention to a passerby dressed in ordinary clothes. It actually saved him a lot of trouble. There were so many planets under Aflon's control, so there was a reason why he had chosen this place. After exiting the port, when Scylla walked to a street corner, he saw a seemingly ordinary black flying car parked there quietly. After glancing at the license plate, Scylla walked over. At the same time, the two people inside the car also saw Scylla. They got off the car and bowed towards Scylla. "Young master." Scylla recognized one of them as one of the bodyguards he had rammed into the wall. He had never seen the other person before. When he heard this young master, Scylla raised an eyebrow. Although he had accepted this mission, he had never received such treatment in his entire life. For a time, he felt really awkward. No matter what Scylla thought in his heart, his face did not change in the slightest. He nodded and sat down after the other party had opened the door at the back. Holy shit, and it was a triple-purpose flying car. After scanning the interior of the car once, Scylla thinks of a phrase, low-key luxury. A big family was a big family after all. The cost of this car must have been more than 1,000,000 galactic credits. After it was done, the car rose steadily and slid into the air runway. Among the many speeding flying cars, this car could be completely ignored and blended into the crowd. The superiority of the 10 free trade sectors over the 13 backward sectors was not just a little bit. This could be seen from the speeding flying cars around it. If any one of them were to be placed on planet Brown Earth, it would definitely cause quite a commotion even in the most prosperous area of planet Brown Earth. However, here, they were merely ordinary members. The skyscrapers gradually became sparse. There weren't many skyscrapers in the direction that the car was heading towards. Further ahead, there were many spacious villas. After bypassing these villas, the flying car finally stopped at a place that looked like a manor. The old butler, Soap, was already waiting there. After seeing Scylla, Sophie smiled amiably. "Young Master Scylla, please follow me." He got into character really quickly. Scylla cursed in his heart. "Thank you." Sappho led Scylla to a big house surrounded by flower beds. It wasn't tall at only 3 stories, but it took up a lot of space. It was bigger than the villas they passed by earlier, and it looked a lot more luxurious. Although the servants did not show any reaction on the surface, they were extremely curious. A few days ago, there was a rumor that their master had found a stray illegitimate child. At the time, they had thought that it was impossible, but they never imagined that they would actually see it with their own eyes. Yes, anyone who saw Scylla would think that he and Aflon were father and son. This was the so-called coincidence. Moreover, Scylla believed that news of Aflon retrieving his illegitimate child would spread the next day. There might even be videos or pictures published in some electronic magazines. However, the spread and development trend of the rumor was not something that Scylla needed to worry about. It was Aflon's business, and it was also one of Aflon's strategic plans to fight for the position of the family successor. After putting on a show of filial piety with Aflon at the dining table, Aflon called Scylla to the study. 7 Lights has already completed the relevant procedures. You will bring your new ID and admission notice to 7 Lights University tomorrow. You only need to bring the identity of an illegitimate child with you, and don't worry about anything else. Other than that, you must know that even the forces of those who obstruct me can't infiltrate too much over there. However, there is one thing you must know, and that is that the waters of Sector B are very deep. You must be careful when you act. Right now, you carry the surname, Duance, in your name, so don't come into contact with anything that is detrimental to the Duance family. However, Aflon took out an electronic notebook from the drawer and pulled up a few pictures inside. He passed them to Sillin. Everyone on this can become your prey. Receiving the electronic notebook from Aflon's hands, Sillin quickly flipped through the information on it. Some of the people listed on this electronic notebook could be killed directly, while others could be captured alive. There were freelance hunters, specially trained assassins, and also people related to Aflon's competitors and their forces. Every person had a corresponding bounty. You don't have to look for these people on purpose. As long as you are still in Seven Lights University, they will naturally come looking for you unless I become the heir of the family. Remember this information. When you arrive at Seven Lights University, I will send someone to update you with the latest information every once in a while. As for how to treat them when the time comes, it's up to you. Of course, whether or not you can get your hands on these prey will depend on your own abilities. Prey had come knocking on his door, and the employer had automatically updated his information. Why wouldn't he take such a great opportunity? Sillin quickly flipped through the information in the electronic notebook before passing it back to Aflon. Aflon was stunned. He finished reading it so quickly. After receiving Sillin's affirmative reply, Aflon said nothing more. What he needed to do and what he needed to pay attention to were all clearly stated in the agreement. Aflon gave Sillin a new debit card. The debit card was registered with Sillin Duant's identity, and there were already 150,000 galactic credits stored inside. He transferred the money for the next 30 days to the card in one go. The next day, Aflon purposely mobilized one of the family starships he was managing to escort Sillin to Sector B. Seven Lights University was not some place on some planet in Sector B. It was an entire planet. An entire planet was an academy. Because of this, Seven Lights University was also known as Planet Seven Lights. There were 7 space stations around Planet Seven Lights. All incoming starships had to dock there, and those who were about to enter the academy would enter a specialized transport with the admission notice in their hands. Other starships and spaceships were not allowed to approach Planet Seven Lights, and unrelated people were not allowed to step into Seven Lights University. No matter which big family you came from, you had to obey Planet Seven Lights rules. All the starships that came here were very obedient. If anyone did not obey the rules, the Sentinel defense system on the space station would automatically list them as dangerous targets and open fire immediately. I don't care which family you come from, we'll talk after we fight. Don't say that Planet Seven Lights was too arrogant, they had the capital to be arrogant. Otherwise, why would Aflon say that the waters on Planet Seven Lights were very deep? The starship escorting Sillin stopped at the space station. After connecting to the space station's passage, 5 bodyguards escorted Sillin into the space station. Sillin saw someone being stopped at a passage not far away. The reason was because there were too many escorts. There was an eye-catching sign at the entrance of the passage that said, "Escorts must not exceed 5." There were a lot of people who were escorted by bodyguards just like Sillin in the examination hall. They ranged from 15 to 25 years old, and the expressions on their faces were very similar, excitement and apprehension. It was obvious that their identities were extraordinary, and any random one of them would be from a famous family in a certain sector. But in this place, their extraordinary identities of the past seemed to have been turned ordinary. After the identity verification and the admission notice were scanned, the 5 bodyguards returned, and Sillin also boarded the transport to Planet Seven Lights. Chapter 16. The transport would depart once every 2 hours. When Sillin walked into the transport, there were less than a third of the people in the cabin. Judging from the time, he still had to wait for another hour. There were a few girls at the front discussing in whispers and glancing at the people inside the cabin from time to time. Sillin's outfit was specially prepared by Aflon, and with Sillin's extremely deceptive face, it was obvious that he was the young master of some big family at first glance. Therefore, when Sillin came in, the girls' discussion grew a little louder, and their intense gazes were so intense that Sillin thinks it would be hard for him to ignore them. However, it only lasted for a few minutes before the girls' gazes turned to the other people who came in. One had to know that more than half of the people in this transport were people with solid backgrounds. Sillin thinks back to when he was on the 6th Squad's ship and heard Beaver and the others spouting nonsense. They said that in a certain sector's military academy, 29 out of 30 people in a class were descendants of generals. Their fathers were all sector generals, and the only person who wasn't a descendant of generals had a father who was a colonel. At first, he was fiercely despised by those 29 people, and 2 days later, all 29 of them went silent. Why? Because their colonel was a Galactic Federation colonel. Even the system they were in was different from the sector they were in. 10 sector generals might not be able to beat a Galactic Federation colonel. Diaz even joked that it was a good thing Sillin wasn't in a Sector C military academy, or he would be able to grab anyone he wanted to be a descendant of a galactic military officer. When he thought of this, Sillin smiled soundlessly. He picked up the 7 Lights handbook given to him by the inspection staff when he came in and quickly flipped through it. There were many things he already knew beforehand, and with Sillin's extraordinary reading ability and memory, he finished flipping through it in less than 2 minutes. Touching the leaf pattern on his thumb, Sillin sighed emotionally. Even the famous 7 Lights could not detect this ring. Just what kind of existence was the Gen family? He pressed a button on the armrest of his seat, and a holographic screen popped up in front of him. Looking at the colorful planet against the dark background of space on the screen, Sillin looked forward to the following life. "Hey, bro, can I sit here?" A young man with a bright smile pointed to the seat next to Sillin and asked. Judging from his clothes, this guy's family conditions were quite good. Of course. Sillin smiled. It could be seen that the person in front of him was very friendly. "My name's Chev Allen," said the boy in a friendly tone. Sillin. The boy named Allen chuckled and stretched his neck to look at the girls in front of him. "The quality of our term's beauties is pretty good." It seems like 7 Lights has a lot of beauties to begin with. Hee, how nice. Seeing that the beauties had completely ignored him, Allen scratched his head and turned his neck away. All the entertainment in the cabin had been put in the luggage compartment. Since it was boring to sit and wait, Allen took the initiative to find a topic to talk to Sillin. As a hunter, Sillin was involved in every aspect. Therefore, Sillin was more or less able to say a little about the topics Allen brought up. Allen recounted his happy life of eating, drinking, playing, and his once free and unfettered life. Then, he frowned again. "Sigh, I heard that 7 Lights isn't a good place to live either. At first I didn't want to come to Sector B to receive higher education. The competition is too fierce after all. But ever since I stayed out for too many nights, my dad got mad and threw a sum of money at me before throwing me here to fend for myself. My colorful life, when will it come back?" It was true that those whose admission results were not ideal would have to pay a huge sum of money to enter 7 Lights. That being said, Sillin also knew that if their results were too bad, 7 Lights would not allow them to enter no matter how much money was thrown at them. The fact that Allen was able to enter 7 Lights meant that his results were not too bad. Before Sillin could comment on Allen's words, he heard a low, cold snort behind him. While Sillin and Allen were chatting away, some people had entered the cabin one after another. At a glance, it looked like 4/5 of the seats were already filled. It was also during this time that the teenager sitting behind Sillin and Allen came in. Allen did not show any anger because of this disdainful snort. Instead, he curiously leaned on the back of the chair and looked at the person who had let out the snort. The person ignored Sillin and Allen who were looking at him. He simply stared at the display screen in front of him. Unlike the clothes of the people around him, this teenager's clothes were not shabby, but they looked plain and ordinary compared to the people around him. Of course, one must not underestimate this person because of his clothes. How many of those who could sit here and qualify to enter 7 Lights were ordinary people? Allen's eyes flashed. "Kong Man. I didn't think that I would be able to sit on the same transport as the genius Kong Man." It was only now that Kong Man, who had scoffed at Allen's words of "throw in money" and "live a carefree life," finally moved his gaze from the screen to Allen. "You know me?" Although it was a question, there was no surprise in it. Silen could see the arrogance at the bottom of Kang Man's eyes, and the stubbornness on his body. Of course. The genius Kang Man, our batch's specially recruited student. At the age of 14, you've already published research results with over 50 contribution points. You've even been published in some academic electronic journals. But I can't understand that electromagnetic code or whatever you're researching at all. The more Alan spoke, the more excited he became. There was not the slightest hint of embarrassment that he couldn't understand. My dad has pulled my ears countless times and told me that the only two geniuses who are 15 years old, the youngest of our batch, are called the twin stars of 7 lights. One of them is you, Kang Man, and the other is G Pride. At this point, Alan suddenly stopped and looked at the cabin door with his mouth wide open. G Pride. After staring blankly for a moment, Alan excitedly grabbed Silen's sleeve and shook it fiercely. Silen, it's G Pride, it's really G Pride. Oh my god, I'm actually sitting on the same transport as this batch's twin stars of 7 lights. What do I do? I want to scream. What the hell does it have to do with me if you want to scream? Silen looked at his sleeve that was about to be shaken loose. He wanted nothing more than to give this guy a smack on the head. You're not a beauty, so why the hell are you reacting like this? Besides, you didn't react this much when you saw Kang Man just now. G Pride was none other than the person Silen saw at the entrance of the passageway who was stopped because there were too many escorts. G Pride, who had just walked into the cabin, wore an impatient expression on his face that caused women to overflow with motherly instincts. After he frowned and scanned the cabin once, his gaze was attracted by a certain someone's waving arm. It couldn't be helped. It was hard not to notice. Inside the cabin, Alan was the only one happily waving his arm and swaying back and forth on his seat in excitement. His other hand was pointing at the empty seat next to Kang Man, and his mouth was moving exaggeratedly. Sit here. Sit here. Silen felt that if it wasn't for the fact that loud noises and careless walking were not allowed inside the cabin, this guy would definitely yell at the top of his lungs and run over to G Pride. For a moment, every gaze inside the cabin swept towards Alan. Their eyes looked as if they had suddenly discovered a monkey hiding in the crowd. Silen lowered his head and, seriously, read the 7 Lights Handbook. Kang Man, on the other hand, was staring straight at the screen in front of him as if he did not know Alan at all. Pride's tender face turned from red to green, then green to black. He felt as if he himself had turned into a monkey. Pride roared in his heart, "Who the hell is that bastard?" It was at this moment a staff member just happened to walk in from outside. Seeing that Pride was still standing at the entrance, he urged, "Hurry up and find a seat. The plane is about to take off." His eyes swept across and pointed at Alan who was waving at him. "Just sit there. It's pretty good." Pride gritted his teeth and walked towards the seat next to Kang Man with a black face. Damn it, what the hell is going on? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.